continental calendar of Nas on March 4, 1424, the flames of the Great Stallion War are burning on the continent of Nas. The continent is engulfed in flames, numerous lives have turned to ashes, and there is no being that can stop the Demon King's army. Only despair exists in that place. To everyone's surprise, a warrior who stands against the army suddenly appears. Looking at the screen of his monitor while playing, our protagonist explains that this was more or less the premise of the game Paradiso. This game was a virtual reality RPG where the player fights against the demon army as a warrior to become a king who can protect his territory. After returning from work, our protagonist spent all his free time playing. Being an older person, the young man was simply an expert in mastering all the knowledge about the nature of characters and things related to the game. The man explains that he never lost the title of the #1 blog in Paradiso Information for 10 years but became so ill that he could no longer continue with it. Even worse, due to his illness, the young man ended up dying from overwork and playing too much. While thinking that he died at 30 years old without even having the chance to go on a date, the boy wakes up startled next to a girl with bluish hair. The girl, looking at her chubby lord, asks if he had a nightmare. For some reason, the lord seems desperate, looking in all directions trying to understand what was happening. The man asks who the girl was and, apologizing, inquires where he was. However, the girl does not understand her lord's question, and a sense of doubt settles throughout the house. Our protagonist, Jared, was checking his statistics, and the young man realizes he had an abnormal condition of high obesity, and looking in the mirror, is shocked. The boy also notices that due to his condition, his lifespan had decreased by 20 years, and with these statistics, the body he was in must be of the lowest class. Sitting in an armchair, the boy says that for now, he would try to calm down and think better about the situation. Looking into the mirror, he thinks that his name was Shin Taepum, but that was in his past life because he died and reincarnated as a young, obese lord named Jared. The boy thinks he was sure he reincarnated in Paradiso Online because he could see the game's user interface, so that meant this was his reality. Jared goes into complete despair because even this time, his life would also end soon because in 10 years, the Great Stallion War will happen, and most importantly, in 5 years, there will be severe drought and famine, and various natural disasters will occur. Sweating, the boy thinks that when the Great War of Mass erupts, all nations and territories will be forced to participate in the war, and being a terrible lord, he will die. Irritated, the boy questions how insignificant this character is because even he, Shintai, the encyclopedia of this game, did not know him. However, from fidgeting angrily in his armchair, the young man, due to his large and immense weight, breaks it, collapsing to the floor. On the ground, the boy states that when he looked at Jared's memories, he realized that the boy grew up as a slightly effeminate young man. But getting up, he thinks that there was still hope and he just needed to lose a little weight because this time, he had the memory of his past life. And this is an advantage only he had, so he could use this advantage like a bug. Already standing, Jared thinks that this was the overwhelming advantage of knowledge and he could have a better future than anyone else if he used it correctly. Jared thinks that since it's like this, he would become the strongest warrior who will become a great king after unifying the world, and that was his goal in this life. After some time, we see the same girl as before with a duster, cleaning the dust from some books, saying she would clean well so her lord could use the office. Suddenly, a huge noise can be heard from the office, and the woman, upon realizing it, sees her lord violently opening the door and calling her name. The girl, promptly wanting to help, responds to him, but the man starts searching the entire place for something, and Hayes asks what he was looking for. The boy explains that it was the memento his father had left him before he died, and irritated with the former owner of the body who put something so important anywhere, Hayes goes to the desk, opens the drawer, and takes out an artifact, saying that this was what her lord was looking for. He kindly approaches the girl, taking the artifact from her hand and thanking her. Hayes is extremely happy to help her master, asking if the young man needed anything else from her. However, the only thing the young boy asks is for her to leave the place. For some reason, Hayes becomes suspicious, stating that she could sense something different about her lord. This different thing was that he was now full of energy, and the maid becomes extremely excited about it. Leaving the place, the girl starts talking about how she will also get excited, just like her lord. Picking up a necklace, the boy explains that this is the inheritance from his father, Viscount Barrett, and also a useful artifact that could help him in magical growth. Staring at the artifact, the boy thinks that now he will destroy it and thus begins to use magic on the object, causing it to crack. He thinks that this is the only way for a miserable young man like him to have the 4th magical class, and so the necklace begins to float and continues to break apart. However, he compliments that he would not be able to invoke it with the little mana he had, and thus the object finally shatters. And now the service of the artifact is the only way for him to obtain this benefit, and a black sphere begins to emerge in its place. The boy thinks he is doing this to be able to evolve quickly, and hopes his father forgives him while his hair begins to blow from the strong energy in the place. The wave of black mass starts to turn into a whirlwind, and a beast begins to come out of that mass and expand. After taking shape, the monster questions who the foolish human was that had summoned it, and Jared thinks that it was a being that could only be known once in a lifetime. Isabella, the cheerful spirit, and the girl starts to laugh in the direction of our protagonist, revealing her entire demonic and strange appearance. She questions the foolish human what the desire was that made him summon her, and Jared thinks that Isabella will be his first step on the path to success. Jared begins to try to calm down to avoid panicking because Isabella does not like cowards, and that woman likes adventurers. He also thinks that if the woman leaves, he will have no other chance to become powerful in this life. The man then, convinced of his thoughts, affirms with all of his words that he wants to obtain the mind's eye. Isabella starts laughing, saying that the man was very greedy and asks if the boy wanted to see what was inside other people's heads. Jared confirms while beginning to think that the mind's eye is a hidden ability possessed by only one person in the entire Paradiso territory. He explains that the mind's eye is a skill that can be used to scan the statistics of other players as well as their character, and the ability improves based on level. Our protagonist, who summoned Isabella, is planning to use this ability for territory management and seeking future possibilities, and Isabella agrees, but in return, the demon questions what was the most precious thing Jared had to offer in return, and that the boy should think about it now because everything has a price. Suddenly, a contract forms in front of our protagonist, and taking it, Isabella says she would give the mind's eye to the boy, but would take the most precious thing from him. She explains that if it is money, she will take it all. If it is honor, he will become a slave, and if it is family, she will eat them. The boy realizes that Isabella read his mind, discovering what his most precious possession was while stating that this was the curse of the evil spirit he had heard so much about. Suddenly, for some reason, the boy smiles and Isabella panics, questioning herself about what was happening with her lips as they were pouting. Smiling, Jared says he was thinking of something he considers extremely valuable to himself but not relevant enough to affect him, being a useless treasure. He also states that it was difficult to keep this thought in his mind, but he managed to make an effort. The most precious thing he possesses is the first kiss of Shin-Taepon, a 34-year-old man who died single, and hearing this, Isabella begins to think she did not want that. The demon tries to flee, asking what kind of lunatic thinks their most precious thing is their first kiss. The contract was already sealed, and a force begins to pull her. Opening his hands, the boy thinks it is incredible to think that he will give his first kiss to an evil spirit, and even against her will, Isabella will have to comply. Even trying to appear unwilling, the boy asks for God to bless that country, and thus the eternal contract with Isabella began that day. In the mansion's corridors, two maids were discussing because they found the way their lord was acting strange, as he had been locked away until recently. He was a person who found life very difficult and boring because he had such a repetitive daily routine and only seemed happy when he was eating. Then Hayes can be seen running. One of the maids questions why the lord was in the basement since no one ever visited there, but Hayes rushes past them, asking them to move out of the way. With a stack of papers in her hands, the girl keeps running, and one of the girls asks if she needs help, but she says no, she can handle it on her own. The light-haired maid says that Hayes is very delicate and doesn't even mind always being mistreated, and they both feel sorry for the young girl. Hayes finally arrives in the room with the books and papers, telling her lord that she had brought the documents about his territory and vassals. For some reason, Jared asks the girl to stop right where she is. Starting to analyze her statistics, he realizes her loyalty is rated as S, and most importantly, the young girl has many special tendencies. Using his new ability, the boy thinks that for a maid, she had amazing qualities and would definitely make her a healer. Jared also sees that the young girl has an unrequited love and has been in love with someone for more than 10 years but laments not being able to fulfill it as he will be busy. Our protagonist starts looking at all the papers and studying the information about the territory. Suddenly, Hayes, who seemed to be restless about something, apologizes to the boy, and the boy does not understand why she was saying that. Hayes explains that every time her lord needs her, she should do her job correctly, but if he was analyzing the papers, she had done something wrong. Jared, looking at the girl, begins to recall the memories of the former owner of the body who used to hit the girl when she didn't do the job correctly. Thinking about this, the boy curses the former owner of the body because he was very arrogant and handed most of his work to Hayes, and if anything went wrong, he took it out on her. In his mind, the boy states that although it wasn't him who did this, he would make amends, and Jared starts to approach the girl, calling her name. Our protagonist raises his hand, and the girl prepares herself as if she knew she would get slapped. However, surprisingly, Jared hugs the girl, apologizing for everything he had done. The boy apologizes for all the mistakes he made with the girl, saying that it must have been hard for her and thanks her for not complaining and staying with him despite everything. Our protagonist also says that she will never have to see his pathetic side again because he has had a complete change of heart. Smiling kindly, Jared asks if the girl could trust him once more to become a good lord, and Hayes remains silent. The girl suddenly says that she feels very sorry for Jared while continuing in his embrace. Hayes explains that she is apologizing because she felt so moved that she couldn't stop crying, continuing to be shy. Desperate, the young girl says she will stay by the boy's side forever, and the boy thanks her for forgiving him and trusting him. Shin-Ta thinks that now he was Jared, so he had to bear all the sins his former self committed. After some time, a huge table with several chairs set up can be seen. Hayes is looking at Jared, stating that it wasn't right no matter how much she thought about it. The girl says that the boy will faint if he only eats herbs and vegetables like that, and the boy continues to eat only plants. Our protagonist thinks that for a pig like him, he needed to do this if he wanted to lose some weight. The young man explains that in the game Paradiso, these vegetables had an effect to trick his satiety level. But even knowing this vegetable diet tastes so horrible that no one would willingly eat them, and all the food there seems spoiled. The system appears informing about some benefits the boy was receiving for eating vegetables and healthy foods. And Jared says that incredibly, he could feel the fat in his belly slowly disappearing. But even with all this, it was still very difficult, and he wanted to vomit and trying to hold his mouth with his own hands to avoid spitting out the food. Hayes asks the boy to eat it, placing a beautiful steak on the table, and the girl explains that she prepared this vegan steak as a precaution. The maid explains that she learned to make it because it is good for a healthy diet, but before her lord never ate it, so it was always thrown away, but now it would be different. Crying with happiness, Jared once again curses his former self, questioning how the boy could have mistreated an angel like that girl. While savoring the steak, the boy felt like an angel, thinking that the food was delicious, and this was expected from an A-level cook. Our protagonist begins to think that he would start soon. He then states that after reading the document, he discovered that the territory of Cribia is located in the northern part of the kingdom. This is a poor territory classified with a cold climate that makes cultivation impossible, but pests, monsters, and bandits are rampant everywhere. The boy also states that one good point is that due to the poor location of this place, great events and missions can be easily found there. Jared finishes eating while also commenting that the problem was that he was too weak to extract benefits at this moment. Determined, the boy stands up, banging on the table, and says that for now, he needed to rebirth himself. However, the demon Isabella suddenly appears, ordering the boy to return the mind's eye immediately, and the boy is startled. The piglet questions why the demon was still there, and Isabella asks how a foolish human dared to deceive her. The demon says she will keep bothering the boy forever until she recovers her power, while the boy just accepts, saying it won't be easy. 10 years ago, in a memory, a person can be seen knocking on the door, calling his lord and asking him to open the door immediately. A man with black hair and a scar on his eye says it is a tragedy that the previous lord has passed away. However, the soldier suggests to the boy that he should overcome the past and start thinking about the future. The man also says that they would fight together in this difficult moment and keeps knocking insistently on the door. However, young Jerry continues sitting on the floor, resting his hands on his knees while crying. Sad about the whole situation, the boy remains in his place without moving, just crying and lamenting his father's death. Back to our protagonist's mansion, the present time, someone is saying that suddenly the Lord had called them. A man who is missing an eye and has red hair is drinking and questioning if the Lord was preparing a New Year's party. The man continues to drink his beverage and, looking to the side, notices two maids there. The drunk goes up to the two, saying good morning to Hayes and grabbing both girls in his arms. Hayes says good morning to Graskus, but is uncomfortable with the whole situation, and the man says he likes the girl's positive side. The drunk can only think that he couldn't understand what such a beauty wanted with the fat lord, but surely he would have her. The same man we saw in the flashback is arguing with Graskus, asking what he was doing there since he had already told the boy not to hit on the women. Hayes calls the man Lakis, and he says that a lord's knight should not behave inappropriately, and for some reason, Graskus is surprised to see the man. Changing his expression to anger, Graskus asks if Lakis really thinks he has the right to lecture the chief of Cribia's public security. He also says that it seemed the man still didn't know his place even after being defeated by the Lord, and Lakis gets extremely irritated hearing that going up to the boy. The soldier faces the drunk, challenging him to say that again, but the boy just mocks, calling him an old man. However, an unknown elderly man appears, ordering the two to stop because the Lord would arrive soon. Lakis, turning around, calls the old man Oren while showing respect, but unlike him, Graskus leaves angrily, saying he couldn't believe a toothless dog and a retired old man could still step inside the Lord's mansion, and they were both disgraces. Seeing the man leave, Lakis questions how an arrogant brat like him became a security chief, but Oren says that the two of them couldn't do anything about it. They head to the meeting place, and a long table with several people seated can be seen. Some of the nobles who were talking find it strange, stating that they can't believe the Lord had called a meeting. They are also impressed that Jared was reading the reports they had just delivered, something the man never did. Graskus continues drinking and then slams the bottle on the table, questioning why his lord was reading a report since it didn't suit him. Graskus tells his lord that the young man should end this meeting now and drink with him because the boy brought a rare liquor and bets his lord would love it. For some reason, upon hearing this, Jared becomes interested, gripping the papers tighter and repeating the word liquor. Graskus continues offering the drink, and Lakis just observes, thinking that this scoundrel seduces the Lord every time the meeting happens so that the Lord ends up fooling around. The determined swordsman stands up and declares that he will stop Graskus regardless of the consequences, all for the glory of Cribia. However, Jared, with a completely serious expression, questions if the red-haired man is crazy and asks how he dares to come to a meeting while drunk. Neither Lakis nor Graskus understand the Lord's question, and the man starts laughing, asking his lord not to be sulky because they hadn't drunk together in a long time. But suddenly, a spell called Magic Missile is activated and a beam of bluish energy breaks the liquor bottle Graskus was holding. The drunk is in shock just watching his alcohol spill on the floor, and Jared says that this time he will turn a blind eye to the man's degrading act. Irritated, Graskus says that it didn't matter if the Lord was his superior, he wouldn't forgive someone who used magic against him. However, Jared just ignores him, throwing some papers on the table and saying they would move on to the next topic. Calling Graskus by name, Jared asks if the Chief of Public Security is satisfied with the wealth he has accumulated by abusing his authority. Now standing, the drunk is completely confused, and Jared continues, saying that he had harmed many inhabitants of the territory because he was blinded by greed. The Lord adds that the citizens could not trust the government of Cribia because various abuses and crimes were being committed against innocents. Finally, our protagonist concludes that he also heard Graskus has been taking the Lord's subordinates without permission, and thus Jared invokes a fire spell. The Lord states that for all the other sins the drunk has committed, he will continue attacking the man even after burning Graskus' face completely. Desperate, the man tries to flee the place by running, but immediately a fireball is launched against his back, hitting him squarely. Graskus can only fall to the ground, unconscious and defeated, and Jared says that he really wanted to kill the man, but to uphold the law, he will stop there. Our protagonist tells everyone there that on that day, Graskus will be removed from his position as Chief of Public Security, and the Lord will be thoroughly investigating all the corruption that has been happening in that territory. All the other people at the table immediately kneel, apologizing to their master and stating that they have sinned gravely. Lakis just observes the situation, thinking that our protagonist had defeated Graskus, who was very strong in battle and it was defeated with just one strike. Looking at the Lord, he also adds that this dignity is the same as the previous Lord, Viscount Barrett. Our protagonist calls Lakis, saying he would announce the man as the new Chief of Security for Cribia, and the man is confused. But before he could refuse, Jared asks if he would disobey an order from the Lord, and Lakis just kneels, saying he would comply promptly. The blonde boy also says that this is an order from the Lord and asks if anyone in the room has anything against it, and everyone responds no. Jared thinks that with this, he has managed to restore the Lord's dignity, which had fallen to the bottom after Jared had done all this. And looking at everyone's statistics, he says the problem is he hasn't found someone he could use as his right and left hand. But looking to the side, he turns his attention to Mr. Owen, and the old man smiles back. However, before making a decision, Jared thinks he should take it easy because he had the mind's eye to guide him. After a month in a house, someone is desperately shouting that someone couldn't do something. A poor peasant says he won't be able to work anymore if that person takes his money, begging the man to forgive him. But the bandit tells the poor peasant to shut up because that's why he should have paid the street tax when it was charged, and he should just stay quiet. One of the bandit groups says they haven't seen Mr. Graskus collecting taxes lately, questioning if he just went on vacation somewhere. The man also tells the white-haired bandit not to spend that money even if Graskus hasn't come to collect it. Suddenly, a knocking sound at the door, as if someone was calling, echoes through the place, and the bandit chief asks one of his subordinates to go see what it was. A bald man goes to the door, opening it slightly and asking who it was. There in front was our protagonist saying hello. The bald man calls the boy a piglet, but before he realizes it, a punch quickly hits his jaw, sending some teeth flying. After the punch, the bandit is thrown across the house, and all the others in the group are shocked by the sudden situation. Lakis is extremely irritated, questioning how a bandit like that could insult his lord, asking if the boy wanted to die. Jared tries to calm the situation, saying that he didn't mind the insult, and it was okay. However, these are the people who are collecting illegal taxes from citizens and merchants. Returning to his serious expression, the Lord orders Lakis to capture all the bandits and not let any of them escape. With an extremely satisfied expression, the soldier cracks his knuckles, saying he will obey his Lord's orders with great pleasure. He states that this will be swift justice carried out by the new Chief of Security, and the bandits, hearing that, are incredulous, realizing that Graskus had been defeated. After teaching the bandits a lesson, in the back of the place where they were, the bandit chief is seen sneaking out with a bag of belongings. However, behind him, our protagonist opens the door, questioning where the man thought he was going, and the man is startled, throwing the bag into the air. Abandoning all the money, the bandit tries to escape by running through the snow, but Jared quickly uses his magic missile ability, striking him several times. After the whole situation, a group of citizens thanks the Lord and Lakis for their services. A group of soldiers takes the chained bandits to prison, and the citizens are relieved as they were wondering when these scoundrels would be punished. Lakis starts his speech informing all the people of Cribia that the Lord admitted his previous mistakes and declared that he would take care of the citizens with all of his strength from now on. He also says that getting rid of those criminals was just the first step, and the bandit chief thinks he couldn't believe Graskus was caught. Lakis continues his speech, and thus we see the peasants receiving food as an apology and mercy from the Lord. Even a bard was singing at the place, cheering everyone up, and Lakis concludes his speech by asking everyone to be grateful to the Lord for their whole lives. After that, Jared and his companion are riding through the city on horseback, being greeted with applause from the citizens. After returning to the mansion back in the council meeting room, it is explained that the citizens began to see the territory and the Lord in a positive light. Lacaz adds that the people who supported the Lord started to appear, so if his plan had been a success, and Jared says that their efforts are paying off. Our protagonist asks if Lacaz is doing well in his new position and with his subordinates, and the man promptly responds that he is. He thanks, saying that he was fine and happy that his lord had appointed him to this position. The boy responds that if his soldier was satisfied, he was too, because he believed the man could supervise public order well from now on. The meeting begins, and it is explained that a month after the territory's criminals were punished, public order and sentiment improved visibly. Jared explains that Lacaz recruited and assigned many skilled soldiers, all unified under his name as the feudal lord of Cribia. And all of this happened because he has the mind's eye, and we return to the present moment where our protagonist is still being pestered by Isabella, who is still insisting. Sir Elrin says that the crops are growing thanks to the new farming method, but half of the year is winter, and due to other factors, the results are not favorable yet. Avila, another vassal, says that although they are trying to use mana stones as a special product of that territory, it will take some time to achieve the desired result. Jared is thinking, hearing all this, that the mind's eye is not very useful beyond identifying talented people, and he will have to work even harder from that day on. The boy taps his stomach lightly while Lacaz observes this and says he has seen it a few times because this method seemed very effective. Our protagonist says that this is a popular method to lose weight and that he learned it in another territory. The chief of security proudly says that as his lord loses weight, he increasingly looks like a feudal lord. However, our protagonist is thinking that honestly, this method is not for dieting and is a trick to unfairly increase his own mana capacity. He explains that after emitting mana in each of his hands, you release it back near your body and reabsorb it. And this is the trick to increasing your mana. Although it's not an official bug of Paradiso, it still counts as one, and after doing this for a month, it shows results as if he had leveled up 12 times. Looking at a spell in his hand, Jared also thinks that with this, he could use 4th class magic 1 or 2 more times. However, a young soldier starts running towards Jared, explaining that there was a message for the Lord. The desperate soldier explains that the search party his lord had sent found a bandit camp inside the coal mine. Additionally, they found slaves inside, which catches our protagonist's attention and angers him. Memories from a year ago surface, and 2 swords clashing against each other can be seen. 2 men, one with red hair and the other with white hair, are dueling with swords and shields. From a distance, a person with a feminine appearance is watching the fight, excited about what they are seeing. The young girl thinks that those 2 are very skilled with their swords. Then 2 other people approach her, questioning if she had been watching for too long and saying that she would get in trouble if she continued like that. But surprisingly, the girl smiles, calling the 2 her brother and sister, and they say she would be reprimanded by the director if caught wandering around. Lifting a barrel, Lena says it's okay because she's faster than her friends and extremely strong. Talking with her siblings while a beautiful butterfly lands on the barrel, Lena's sister says she can't believe the girl is already 14 years old. The woman asks if the young girl will really work as a maid in the noble's mansion, and Lena responds affirmatively. Lena says she bets it will be a good place because the director takes special care of her even though she's an orphan. The girl's sister says it's a pity because she was thinking of bringing the girl to her mercenary troop, and the girl remains silent. Again, she calls her siblings, who find her attitude strange and just ask what she wanted. Shy, the girl responds that maybe not now, but wonders if a girl like her could become a great swordswoman if she works hard. The girl states she would prefer to be a swordswoman rather than a maid, but that's not possible currently. The blue-haired boy starts laughing, asking Lena if she knew why there aren't many women in mercenary troops, drawing his sword. Upon drawing the weapon, a huge gust of wind is expelled from the object, lifting dust all around. Seriously, he explains that it's because the world is too dangerous to face with such a simple mindset. He also informs her that most girls will give up or die after facing such a harsh reality. However, this applies to men as well, and the boy starts removing his gloves. The young man explains that gender doesn't matter. What you need is spirit, will, talent, and effort. He also tells her that she is more talented than the 2 of them, and that's why she would succeed. The girl's sister then tells Lena that if she has nowhere to go, she should come to them because she would hire her using her authority as a leader. The girl is extremely happy, smiling, embarrassed, imagining her bright future. But life is tough, and in another place in the future, we see the same smiling girl sitting in a dark basement, calling her brother and sister's names while chained. The girl is in complete despair, and all she can do is scream very loudly. In Lena's memories, we see the pastor calling her name while holding the hands of 2 children. The kind man says that the girl was an angel sent by God, and that's why he asks her to work hard for their orphanage, and smiling, the girl says she would. Back in the present where she is being enslaved, a bandit with a scary face asks if she knew that it was the director who sold her. Irritated, Lena retorts that it was impossible because he was about to make her a maid in a noble's house. All the bandits in the place start laughing while drinking, and one of them says she wasn't a maid but a slave, calling the girl an idiot. One of the bandits has a whip in hand, saying it doesn't matter if the girl is a slave or an orphan. However, she had to be obedient because now she was a slave, and so the man started whipping the girl's back, and she only groaned in pain. She continued trying to deny the facts, affirming to herself that the director wasn't that kind of person. Back in the cell with other children, the girl said that it had been a month since she was sold to the slave traders, and most of the time was spent locked in the cell. A red-haired girl looked at Lena and asked if she was from Mallorca. The girl added that if she was from that place, she was destined to be a slave from the beginning, and Lena asked what she was talking about. The girl explained that most orphans in Mallorca are sold as slaves, and the lord of that place ordered it. The orphanage director was also on their side, so the girl should just give up. However, Lena got angry, saying she didn't want to give up and would escape from that place no matter what happened. The red-haired girl called Lena a fool, and the blonde asked if the girl didn't want to leave that place. Surprisingly, the girl replied that she never thought about it, introducing herself as Mani and saying that the two of them would get along well in that hell until they died. Lena felt a bit uncomfortable hearing that, mentioning that Manny's way of speaking was very discouraging, and the girl replied that she was just accepting reality. The blonde explained that another month had passed and Mani, and she became close quickly. Seeing one of the cells, Lena explained that there weren't many young slaves in that place, and the other slaves acted like lifeless dolls. The girl thought that no matter what condition these slaves were in, they were still sold easily. She also thought that she didn't know if she was lucky or not, but slaves aged 14 like her and Manny were safe until they were 15, and she affirmed in her mind that she wouldn't give up. Half a year had passed, and now Lena was accustomed to the severe manual labor. Cribia became a terrible territory just like Mallorca. The girl explained that Manny taught her a lot about the world, and we see the two side by side, with Manny informing her about what happened to Cribia. Lena said that when she asked Manny how she knew all this, the girl always replied that she had heard it from one of the bandits because she had good hearing. Stirring a pot of food, Manny also said that there weren't many mercenaries in Cribia, so Lena's siblings wouldn't be there, and the girl thanked her for the information. Looking at her chains, the girl continued with a determined look, thinking that she wouldn't give up no matter what happened. Knowing that the food was meant for the bandits, Manny spat in it and then told Lena that she was the most stubborn slave she had ever met. For some reason, the young girl felt embarrassed and, averting her gaze, said that she even liked that about her. Winter arrived and snow covered the entrance to the mining place where Manny and Lena were. Looking at her friend who was lying down extremely ill, the girl said that a year had already passed, and now they were both 15 years old. The only thing the red-haired girl could do was cough and sweat from the high fever she was experiencing, and Lena called her name. The blonde thought that her friend was burning up, and it would be a problem if she didn't get better, so she needed to do something. One of the bandits was drinking with his feet up on the table, saying that the arrogant Grasses always boasted that the bandits only needed to trust him but was caught by a piglet. And because of that, the bandit couldn't sell the slaves and had to hide in that damned underground cave. Suddenly, Lena started calling his name, stating that her friend had a fever, and asking the man to let her have a bowl of hot soup. The girl knelt, stating that she would no longer resist and would do whatever the bandit wanted in exchange for just a bowl of soup. The man found this extremely interesting, so after a short period of time, Manny was seen staring at a bowl of soup. Lena kept insisting that her friend eat it before it got cold, and that it would make her feel better. The bandit came up behind her, putting his hand on the girl's shoulder. The bandit said that Manny should eat alone and that Lena should remember she would do everything he asked. Manny was desperate seeing what her friend had done, but when she looked at the blonde girl, she saw that she was saying it was okay. The bandit grabbed Lena's face, starting to provoke her and saying that the sick brat should rest quietly. However, before he realized it, a bowl of hot soup flew into his face, and as it hit him, the man revolted, yelling that it was burning. Taking advantage of the situation, Manny quickly grabbed her friend's arm, urging them to hurry and escape from that place. The red-haired girl scolded her friend, stating that she couldn't have done that just to get a bowl of soup. Manny also insisted that she didn't care if the other slaves did such things, but her friend should never do it because she said she wasn't a slave. The girl was about to continue her speech, but before they realized it, they were caught by the bandit. The man pulled Lena, and just as he was about to attack her, her friend stepped in, taking the blow instead. The only thing visible was Manny falling to the ground with blood flying. Lena, furious at the sight, quickly turned and punched the bandit, forcing him to let go of her. The girl knelt by her friend, who was slipping away from this world, and started to cry incessantly. Lena called her friend an idiot, asking why she had been stabbed in her place. Manny said that her life was like a pit. She grew up among bandits and was used to seeing people being robbed and murdered. But a mere orphan like her friend had such a big dream, and at first she thought it was ridiculous. However, now in her final moments, she admitted that she invited her friend, and that was why she would protect her at all costs. With her strength fading, Manny, as her farewell, asked her friend never to give up and to go to a better place next. Lena said she still hadn't given up. No matter what happened, she would get out of that hell, and didn't notice the bandit behind her was getting up, ready to attack her. The blonde girl affirmed that even if it meant she had to kill everyone there, she would be looking at the bandit with extreme hatred in her heart. The man got irritated, seeing that a mere slave had the courage to look at him with that face, and questioned how she dared to do that. He then said that his face had been burned by Lena's friend, and for that, he would eliminate the girl immediately. However, beside him, a voice questioned if that small wound on his eye could be called a burn, and the bandit was startled, looking to the side. Seeing what it was, the only thing the man could perceive was a huge and powerful flame coming towards him. Our protagonist was extremely irritated, looking at that kind of person and saying that now that seemed like a burn. In the midst of the snow, Lacus was telling Jared that he couldn't believe the bandits really used the Alami underground mine as a hideout and wondered how the Lord knew. The boy said that since Graskus, who took care of them, was gone, the bandits must be trying to convince themselves that the incompetent Lord would let their foolish acts go unpunished. And there was no better place to hide than an underground mine, and Lacus, who was putting on his helmet, said that his Lord had a very good intuition. However, Jared replied that the man overestimated him, and looking back, the Lord told all the soldiers to listen to his command. The boy began a speech stating that they were there to end the infamous bandits who had kidnapped their people to sell them as slaves. And for that reason, they would rescue all the kidnapped victims and show the bandits what true justice was, punishing them all without remorse. Looking into the eyes of all the soldiers, he asked them to kill those criminals without leaving a trace. Thus, the boy wielded his sword, ordering all his soldiers to go into battle for the glory of Cribia, and so the army ran into the place. Inside the coal mine, an attack began against the bandits, who started to panic, calling for everyone to gather there. One of them said they needed to warn their leader, Shed, immediately, but he was quickly struck by a sword in his back. With a bloodthirsty look, Lacus said that no bandit would escape from that place because he would defeat all the enemies. Then, with extreme ease and all his skill, the chief of security attacked 3 bandits, knocking them out. A war spread throughout the place, with various warriors and bandits clashing. Deeper into the mine, our protagonist led a troop accompanied by Lacus, commenting that maybe it was normal for a mine, but there were many bifurcations. Jared said that the ability of their enemy was only that of an armed commoner, and he ordered all his soldiers to spread out and search every tunnel. This was a bit earlier, and now we return to the exact moment when the bandit attacking Lena had been burned by the flames of our furious protagonist. As he walked towards Lena, the boy thought that although he had often seen slave traders in the game, seeing them in person now was repulsive. The Lord knelt beside the small girl and asked if she was alright and what had happened. The girl said she was, but her friend had died while trying to save her, and Lena became even sadder, which further fueled Jared's fury. Looking at Manny's body, he thought it was too late, and even if he used his strongest recovery magic, he couldn't save the girl. The chubby boy hugged Lena, apologizing for arriving too late to save both of them. As Jared looked at Lena, he noticed that she had a very thin body and rough hands like tree bark, indicating that she had suffered greatly from hard labor. The bandit chief, Ched, arrived at the scene and demanded to know what the hell was going on, questioning Jared. Ched, seeing the Lord, realized he wasn't someone important, just the piggy Lord, and showed signs of being extremely drunk. The bandit told his Lord that he should have continued fattening up in his mansion, also questioning what the boy was doing in his workplace. Jared, infuriated, said that it seemed the bandit's life was a mess because Ched was mocking his Lord, and therefore he would kill him personally. Ched got angry, saying he wouldn't die at the hands of a piggy like him, and started to conjure magic to counter his enemies. The 2 mages then faced off, and the bandit quickly launched his lightning magic at our protagonist. With an extraordinary speed, Jared easily dodged it using a magic called acceleration. The drunken bandit panicked, questioning how a mage like him could use that magic so efficiently. But before he could see, our protagonist began running around him, creating a whirlwind of dust that prevented Ched from reading his movements. Ched thought that spell worked by accelerating the body, but was easily broken because it was hard to control, making it difficult for Jared to change direction. In that case, he just needed to destroy everything around at once, so he began to conjure strong electricity magic in his hands. However, before he realized it, he was struck by a blow to his chin, followed by several attacks that made the villain contort like a ragdoll. After finishing his spell, Jared complained, stating that using such a powerful spell in a drunken state as the bandit had left him defenseless. Seeing the man fall to the ground, he told him he was so weak that his anger had already passed, so he asked the man to just disappear from this world, killing him. After completing the mission, the Lord gained loyalty points and the golden age of the territory of Cribia was approaching. Jared thought that with Ched's death, the mine's problem was resolved. All those involved, such as the kidnappers and murderers, were executed to prevent them from further tainting the land with their dirty hands. The main thing was that the captured slaves were escorted back to their loved ones by a soldier from the Republic's order. Inside a carriage, Lena questioned the Lord if he really wanted her to go to his territory. Jared explained that if the girl returned to Malurka, he feared she would be sold again by the orphanage director, so it was the best thing to do. He said he was looking for talented young people to work with him, and would be grateful if the girl came to the territory of Cribia. Jared also guaranteed that the young girl would be trained to become a great swordswoman, and Lena became extremely happy, thanking her Lord. Raising her hands in excitement, she says she would definitely become a swordswoman who could meet Jared's expectations, and the boy smiled, saying that was good. For some reason, the boy stayed silent for a while, thinking about something and affirmed in his mind that he didn't expect to find Lena Jizzle Ellis right there. Lena was supposed to be the vanguard of the Demon King's army in the Great War of Stallion. Even when players attacked her, the girl only smiled while standing firm, living up to her title as the strongest tank. Lena, the living fortress, led the final defense line in the Demon King's army, and any fortress she protected was impossible to break through, regardless of the effort. Healing the girl, he thought that was the best thing to do, as it would prevent Lena from falling into the hands of the Demon King and turning to the dark side. The boy affirmed that he would prepare the young girl for the approaching Great War and make her a rising star in his territory, not the Demon King's. However, the most problematic issue was his neighbor Mallorca, because that lord allowed the illegal trade of slaves and other crimes, so his territory could be affected by those actions. Elsewhere in Mallorca, someone was asking in a mansion where the hell that Idiot had spent the money. A bald man, speaking imposingly, said he had been hearing many stories praising Cribia lately, and he was getting annoyed by that mosquito's buzzing. A man was next to him, smoking a cigar, and the Lord of Mallorca asked Frua what he thought, since he was a friend of Graskus. Smiling, the man with black and white hair, Frua, said with full confidence that he would avenge his friend with his own hands and would personally clean up that place. On a starry night, the moonlight illuminated several houses in the territory of Cribia. The territory's guards were patrolling the city, unaware that above them, someone was jumping from house to house, seemingly up to something malicious. The hooded person stopped in front of a specific house, carrying a sack with something inside. Quickly, in a narrow corridor, he threw the sack with an unknown object and then just watched. The man had light hair and a mask covering his mouth as he just observed the sack landing in the desired spot. The next morning, our protagonist was seen extremely sweaty and tired, running for some reason. Next to him, Lena had a determined look, also running with a resolute expression. Their trainer said it was the last lap, and while Lena was running easily, Jared seemed much more exhausted. Jared, almost fainting, asked if Lena enjoyed running every morning like that, and the girl replied that she did because it was always cold in the mine. The Lord approached her, saying they would continue training their endurance, and he would soon choose a teacher for the girl, who thanked him. Back at his mansion, the Lord was eating his herb meal when he suddenly received news that a letter had arrived from Oren and Avila. The one delivering the letter was Hayes, stating it had arrived that morning. Jared, reading and analyzing the information, said that everything seemed to be going well, and Lena, hearing this, said she also wanted to know what was written. The boy then explained that, in short, it seemed Oren had managed to cultivate a plant called latrila, allowing them to produce some of their own food. Meanwhile, Avila was attracting monster hunters to their territory and had already started selling the mana stones he received from them. Lena said her friend used to say that Cribia was falling into ruin, but now that she was there, she thought the place was amazing. Jared replied that they had just started to improve, and soon the whole continent would know about Cribia. Surprising the boy, Lacus arrived at his side, calling his attention to something. The chubby boy asked what the problem was, and the soldier informed him that there was an urgent report. The two walked to another location, and Jared asked if it had been found that morning, and Lacus replied yes, and it had also been found in other places. Jared, irritated, wondered who the hell would throw a monster into his territory, staring at the body of a dead beast. Lacus said he was deeply ashamed because he should have paid more attention to public order and taken care of it. The Lord walked up to the corpse, saying it wasn't the young man's fault because, fortunately, no citizens died, and since they had no walls, they were vulnerable to invaders. Jared thought that since the level of satisfaction of his citizens was first rate, he was sure the culprit was an intruder, but wondered what the bandit would gain by doing this. Behind them, a little girl's voice could be heard calling for someone, asking the young man to help her mother, and Lakis and Jared turned their attention. The girl said that if the person wanted to sell her for money, that was fine, but she just wanted the young man to save her mother. The vendor said that no matter what the little girl offered, he didn't have the medicine she needed, asking her to stop bothering him. However, the girl did not give up. Jared approached them and asked the girl her name, catching the attention of the merchant as well. In the city center, everyone revered the Lord, and Jared asked the girl if she could tell him what medicinal herb she was looking for. In tears, the girl said her name was Mia, and that her mother had Renella's disease. Hearing this, Jared was extremely shocked, as if he knew something, and the girl explained that to help her mother get better, she needed to find an herb, but the vendor refused to sell it. The vendor then knelt, apologizing and saying he was innocent because Renella's disease was almost impossible to cure, and he couldn't do anything about it. Jared stated that he knew because this disease could only be cured by the blessing of a pontiff or a very powerful potion from the Empire of Athema. The boy thought that this disease was similar to tuberculosis, and its name came from the place where it originated, the territory of Renella, where there were many dungeons and monsters. The Lord knelt down to Mia, asking her to please show him where her mother was. Smiling, the boy said with full confidence that he knew how to treat the disease Mia's mother had. Soon after, they could see a dilapidated and already destroyed house, with Mia saying that was her residence. As they climbed the stairs, the little girl said her mother was on the second floor, and our protagonist thought that the house was old and wondered if the stairs would hold his weight. After quickly climbing up, Maya ran to the room where her mother was and called for her incessantly. The girl went to the woman asking if she was okay and saying she brought someone who could help, but the woman wasn't happy because Mia had done this before. The sick and worn-out woman told the doctor that she couldn't pay for the treatment and apologized for what her daughter had done. Looking at the woman, Jared realized she had only 7 months of life left and was truly nearing death. He then said that no payment was needed and just asked the woman to trust him. Mia, smiling, said that the man wasn't a doctor but the lord of the city, and she told her mother that the Lord had come to save her. Mary, for some reason, said that she hadn't seen her Lord in a long time, and Jared asked if the woman knew him. The woman, coughing up blood, said yes because the Lord had invited her to work as the head chef at the mansion 8 years ago. The man covered his face in embarrassment, saying that at that time he was still very immature and apologized if he had caused her any harm back then. Jared approached the woman lying on the bed, and she asked him not to come close because he could also get infected with the disease. Mary then asked Mia to bring a wet towel for her, and the girl promptly left while Jared watched her go. The young man then went to a window, opening it and observing the body of a beast, asking if the woman used to deal with monsters. The woman replied that he was right because she used to work as a chef in a high-ranking expedition team that dealt with the sale of corpses. Jared explained that people who are frequently exposed to monster corpses easily contract the disease, but the symptoms only become visible when the disease worsens. He said that Mary was originally fine, but her condition worsened because of the monster corpse found near her house, and the woman asked who would do that. Then Lena and Hayes arrived, stating that they had brought all the medicinal herbs the boy had requested, and Jared said that he had already told her to just trust him since he wouldn't leave Mary's side until her condition improved. Crying and emotional, the woman said she didn't know how to repay this debt. However, the Lord replied that they would think about it after she was cured, and quickly, the process to make the potion began. On the roof of that house, the same man who had previously left the corpse nearby was watching everything, saying that the Lord wouldn't create a cure for that disease. However, behind him, Lacus appeared, drawing his sword and saying that he disagreed because his Lord had never failed before. He also said that just as the Lord had predicted, the culprit had returned to the scene of the crime and the man looked back. Lacus, furious, asked if this was the culprit who had thrown monster corpses all over the territory. However, the bandit, laughing with a murderous look, asked why the young man was curious about it when he should already know the answer. Inside the house, our protagonist was mentioning some flower names while sitting in front of Hayes preparing the potion. Hayes said that those 3 herbs were easy to find and didn't believe they could treat the incurable Romella's disease with just that. Using some scientific equipment, they continued boiling the plants to make the cure for Mia's mother. Jared thought that when he played Paradiso for the first time, he came across a post on the homepage about the composition formula to cure Romella's disease. Thanks to that, he could make the cure that was supposed to be released to people only 10 years later, and he would do it now. The sick woman called her Lord's name, and the boy said she could say whatever she wanted. Mary asked why a high-ranking noble like him was working so hard to take care of a commoner. Our protagonist said that someone who has gone through this pain knows well what it feels like to keep their head held high. The woman was incredulous, questioning the boy if he had been infected with Ronella's disease before. But remembering his past life, Jared said no and that he grew up healthy thanks to the love his family gave him. The boy took Mary's hand and then said that his mother didn't just give love, and unfortunately, something happened. It was all true. His family was poor, and his mother couldn't go to the hospital for a detailed examination. When they finally got to the hospital, his mother had already lost the use of her hands and was in the final stage of cancer. He felt more anger than sadness because he didn't have the power to fix the situation before it was too late. Even though all of this happened 15 years ago, Jared said he could still blame himself, remembering his mother hospitalized on a stretcher in his past life. But Lord began shaking the vial with the potion and said he was there because he understood how Mia felt. He also said he didn't want the girl to feel the pain he went through and wouldn't let her lose her own mother. Up on the rooftops, Lacus was chasing the bandit, aiming to capture him. The soldier quickly tried to strike the unknown man, who easily defended himself with his sword. The man then used his small dagger to deflect the soldier's sword and quickly tried to cut his neck. However, as a servant of his lord, Lacus easily dodged the attack from his opponent, surviving the assault. With his enormous sword, he began pushing the bandit back, trying to corner him. The unknown man realized that the soldier was trying to restrain him with brute force. So he aimed at his weak point, managing to dodge an attack from Lacus that almost split him in half. The thief then said he would finish it now, rushing at Lacus and quickly hitting him with a kick. Surprisingly, even with the impact of the blow, Lacus only stepped to the side, still standing. After the kick, the bandit realized that his strike hadn't even scratched the man, and he didn't even need to dodge. Lacus then questioned if that was all the bandit had. The soldier quickly made a downward strike with his sword, questioning how the bandit dared to go against Cribia with such lamentable lack of skill. The bandit barely managed to defend himself with his small dagger, but was thrown upward afterward. In the air, he looked at the soldier, stating that he was stronger than he thought and that the people who hired him hadn't informed him that the chief of the guard was so powerful. Looking at his opponent who was on the roof, the unknown man questioned how that soldier had suddenly become so strong. It was explained that the reason Lacus was so good in an individual battle was because he could control the killing power thanks to his special inclination. Normality and justice. Lakis could surpass his limits and enhance his physical abilities whenever he fought against bad people. The bandit then landed, and it was concluded that a person identified as a villain would never be able to win against Lakis. The soldier stepped forward, telling the unknown man to surrender quietly because he would never be able to win this fight. After hearing that, the unknown man said it was a surprise because he had planned to kill the chief of the guard if discovered, but he had given up on that. He then said he would leave for now, but the soldier got angry, asking if the thief thought he would just escape like that. However, the bandit, laughing with a murderous look, asked Lakis not to be so impatient as they would meet again soon, and he started to lower his mask. He concluded by saying they could fight to their fullest another time, and a strange mist began to emanate from his mouth. The chief of security got irritated, questioning where the mist came from and trying to defend himself with his arms. But as he looked around, he realized that the bandit had disappeared without him even noticing. 2 days later, Mia was seen kneeling and observing something, and Jared asked her to look. Our protagonist began to explain that what she was seeing was done by gathering mana associatively, which was a simpler method as various small energy spheres began to unite. With his other hand, he performed another spell, explaining that this was done by forcibly gathering mana using the forced condensation method. Mia, curious, asked if both could be used for magic, then wouldn't it be better to practice just one method? Jared, dressed in strange clothing, affirmed that everyone thought that way. Dressed as a wizard, he said that, however, evil magicians often corrupt the surrounding mana, and if that happens, a magician who uses the associative method won't be able to use their magic. Mia was alarmed, saying that a magician not being able to use their magic was indeed extremely terrible and concerning. Jared concluded his explanation, saying that therefore, even though it was more difficult, everyone also needed to train the forced condensation method. The girl says she understood but questioned why her lord was dressed in strange clothes and had a funny mustache. Taking off the costume, the boy said he was trying to look like a magic trainer using that. Behind a door, Mary's voice could be heard apologizing and saying that it was breakfast time, so Mia ran off. The woman asked if she was bothering her lord, and he replied that she wasn't because he was also curious to see the dish she had cooked. Calling her Chef Mary, the woman, now cured of the disease and dressed in a cook's outfit, said she hoped the lord would like her dish. The man asked if she was already well enough to work, and the woman replied that thanks to him, she was better. However, for some reason, Isabella was still observing our protagonist with a mischievous look, saying that as expected, he really was different. Various mana particles formed in the air, and our protagonist, who was sitting meditating with a slim body, thought that people always search for shortcuts. Expelling all the particles, he added that everyone looked for a training method to increase their mana by 2 or 3 points, but all of them were inferior, looking at the system screen and receiving the notification that he had created a new training method, asking him to enter the name. What separated the shortcut from those few was the ability to turn the shortcut into their own real path, and his training method was superior. While thinking about what name to give this method, the boy said that this would be the first of his marks in this world, so it would be nice to invent a proper name. Bug Player, the one who loves all the shortcuts used to facilitate their journey. Lying in the air, Isabella, with her tongue out, began to laugh, saying she had been spying on the secret training methods of many magicians, but the boy's method showed an interesting difference. Our protagonist asked the demon if she could see the flaw in this method, and the woman said yes, although normal people couldn't see it. She said she could also affirm that the boy was cheating because he was artificially good at attracting pure mana to his body. Coming up behind the boy and placing her hand on him, Isabella stated that he wasn't a person from this land. Jared got extremely worried hearing that, questioning what the woman was talking about, and Isabella began to laugh. The demon commented that she was just asking if the boy came from another continent because there were rumors that people from the eastern continent were good at mana manipulation. Relieved, the boy lied, saying that now that she had mentioned it, he remembered a story from his ancestors that in their time there was a myth saying something about that. The boy thought that the eastern continent was a major expansion for Paradiso that had been ambitiously worked on for 5 years, but he died before its release. Isabella took advantage of this, questioning what the boy was thinking at that exact moment. The woman said that many interesting things had happened to her when she was with the boy, so she was extremely curious about him. The demon suggested they take it slow and talk with each other a bit since he was the only one who could see her. She touched Jared's eye, looking at the ability she had granted him, but the Lord quickly responded that the mind's eye belonged to him. Blushing, Isabella said he could forget about it and keep the ability, considering it a wedding gift for her future husband. Isabella explained that at first she really didn't like the boy's fat body, but now that he had lost weight, he seemed acceptable. Astonished and shocked, Jared couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked if that was why she had been watching him sleep so much. Hugging him, Isabella said he was a great man, and since she had died without experiencing carnal acts, she would accept him as her partner. She also mentioned that he had given her his first kiss, which made the boy really uncomfortable. Jared, in a panic, said he had to go to the territory of Vernella, but the woman asked him to wait, calling him my love. After some time, Hayes was seen reading a letter from Lakis to the Lord. In the letter, Lakis wrote that Lena was extremely talented, and he was impressed by this. Our protagonist said that the final date for Lena to be the strongest person in Cribio would be by the end of the month, and she must be especially talented, which confused Hayes. The Lord asked Hayes to please tell Lakis that he would soon find a teacher for Lena, and the girl readily agreed. Jared thought he remembered some candidates for the position just in time since he was looking for someone to make the girl extremely strong. But suddenly, surprising everyone, an arrow was shot, breaking the glass of the carriage and nearly hitting Hayes, who was protected by a magical shield. The Lord, who barely managed to save his subordinate, was extremely scared by all of this, wondering what was happening. All the other guards started shouting that it was an ambush and that they should protect the Lord, while Hayes tried to make sense of everything occurring in front of her. A rain of arrows began to come towards the carriage, and Jared quickly conjured a magic shield, protecting himself and his subordinate. Hayes, in a panic, called out her lord's name and tried to throw herself in front of the arrows to protect him. However, the boy got irritated and said it was dangerous, questioning what the girl would do if she died from an arrow hit. Hayes, hugging her lord, affirmed it was her duty to protect him, but Jared told her not to express her devotion by acting recklessly. The boy gave her a gentle tap on the head, asking her to stop fighting and stay there, as if she tried to leave the carriage, he would defeat her himself. The arrows kept coming, and amidst the soldiers trying to protect their lord, Jared emerged, questioning who the insects daring to shoot at them were. Despite his subordinates saying it was dangerous, Jared continued walking forward, and Isabella asked if he needed help, but the lord replied no. Conjuring a shield in front of him, all the arrows were deflected and immediately broken by the mana barrier he had invoked. Through the translucent shield, he could see the army of bandits trying to attack him. Most of them were hooded with something covering their mouths, and one of them told their leader that there was a mage with them. Their leader, Todd, the assassin and mage hunter, replied that it was expected for a mage to be with them. With his enormous axe in hand, Tog said that's why that masked brat had requested his services. Hearing this, Jared connected the dots, thinking the masked person must be the same one Lakis mentioned before and the one who hired Tog to kill him. The man quickly advanced towards the Lord with an axe in one hand and a tool in the other, saying that all mages were useless. Irritated and with black eyes of fury, Tog said he would set an example for this novice while charging to attack our protagonist. Throwing his axe with his right hand, Tog aimed at Jared, who barely managed to dodge using acceleration and prepared to use the magic missile in his hand. But before our protagonist could use the spell, Tog used his other tool to hit his hand and prevent the attack, saying it was useless to do such a cheap trick. Immediately taking advantage of Jared being caught off guard, a man struck the back of the Lord's neck, making him feel the blow. But it was revealed that Jared hadn't been hit as he managed to use his shield to protect himself, then remarked that the bandit's title wasn't just for show. The bandit wasn't deterred by this ability and quickly tried to strike our protagonist several times. Tog thought the boy was very quick at casting spells and must be a 4th category mage or higher, but he continued delivering blows. The man thought that Jared would counterattack if he stopped, so he wouldn't let the Lord attack or defend, continuing his barrage of strikes against the shield. The guards were astonished by the fight, and the bandits convinced themselves that their master was winning, so Tog began to mock our protagonist. However, when Tog was about to land a hit, Jared quickly grabbed the man's staff, stopping him immediately. The Lord realized it was a magical artifact, and the bandit wondered how that mage had stopped his attack. Our protagonist said it was just in time since he felt bad about not having any magical artifacts, declaring that he would take that one. The bandit panicked, seeing the boy use the magic of physical strength enhancement and questioning how that mage had such a constitution. Jared said he had filled Tog's entire body with magic, and before he realized it, the man was already full of green veins being dominated. The Lord said that although he wanted to know about the masked man, Tog probably wouldn't tell him, yet the bandit, in despair, said he would reveal everything. Our protagonist had already taken the bandit's 2 weapons, saying he would love to hear it. However, he wouldn't trust a single word from a criminal, and with Tog's own axe, delivered a strike on the bandit. A little before that situation, you can see a boy imprisoned in a small cage. The boy is blaming himself and murmuring about being captured by the bandits. He realizes that the criminals who captured him were talking to someone about assassinating a merchant. Aki sees that Tog was being hired to kill a medicine merchant. Tog goes to his contractor and asks for at least half the money up front, and the masked man agrees. The masked man thinks that all the residents of Kribia's territory were cured by that medicine. This meant it was easy to find the materials for the potion, so it was certain that our protagonist would go to Ranella to try to gain favors. After a walk, Todd reaches the top of a mountain and wonders if this is where the merchant would appear, and the other man confirms it. Aki, seeing the situation, comments that those assassins had already killed 11 people that week, so someone needed to stop them. We return to the moment when Jared was delivering a blow to the bandit while saying he didn't believe his word. Aki, seeing that scene, gets excited since the leader of the bandits had finally been defeated. The Lord doesn't stop and begins to cast spells, advancing against the remaining bandits. The boy who was in prison becomes really excited to see that, thinking that Jared was the handsome warrior who would save him. After all that situation, Aki can be seen hugging Jared, thanking the young man for saving him. Jared is happy about that, but asks if the boy could at least give him some space. The boy moves away from Jared and apologizes, saying he did that unconsciously because he was happy. During their journey to Ranella, the two talk and Aki tells how he was captured by the bandits after trying to negotiate magical stones. Hearing that, the noble apologizes to the boy as all that happened because there weren't enough people traveling those roads to protect them. Aki thanks the boy, saying he thought he would die soon, but his savior appeared to rescue him. Looking at Aki, our protagonist thinks that he is one of the main investors on the Eastern continent who bought a kingdom using his astronomical prosperity. With great talent for analyzing and predicting market trends, he always managed to be a pioneer of new trends and dominated markets surrounding new fashion items. The boy also thinks it doesn't make sense for that great future merchant to be in Kribia's territory. Jared says he understands that Aki is having difficulties because he lost all his wealth, and thus, he wants to make him an offer. He states that he will give the boy 15% of the profit if Aki sells a certain product in Ranella's territory. In his mind, Jared comments that Aki was an exceptionally well-known figure, so it was better to keep him as an ally. However, surprising our protagonist, Aki accepts the offer, but instead of the profit, he wanted the noble to grant him 2 wishes. Aki also asks for Jared's trust, as he is sure he will do a good job and make a good sale. Jared agrees, but informs that depending on the wishes, they might be denied, and hearing that, the young merchant agrees. Shyly, he says that his first wish is for Jared to call him Aki. The blonde agrees, however. Upon hearing that, Isabella becomes furious with jealousy. At that moment, Aki also says that he will reveal his next wish at another time. Already in Ranella's territory, Hayes comments that he thought the territory would be boring, but it turned out to be amazing. Aki replies that there are many people who think that way, but humans cannot resist the great wealth that the dungeons offer. Jared mentions that once the problem of Ranella's disease is resolved, the territory will have great development potential. After settling in a place, Jared thanks Aki for managing to start the business in a good location, and the boy says he was just returning a favor. In front of a large barrel, Aki asks the blonde if that was the medicine the man was selling to cure Ranella's disease, and the lord replies that it wasn't yet. After filling a container with the liquid from the barrel, it evolves, and the system informs that Jared has reached the daily limit of proficiency increase. Looking at that, the young man confirms his theory and comments that in the game it took a few months to increase proficiency, but he knew of a bug. The lord then gives the item to Aki to sell and explains how the sales will work. After that, the young merchant can be seen selling that potion to an adventurer for just 1 gold coin. Kindly, the boy comments that he would sell the potion at that price only because it was for Tolan. Even so, the adventurer is a bit hesitant, asking if it was a scam. He cannot resist Aki's charisma. He states that it didn't matter to spend 1 more gold coin before dying from the disease, and he promptly pays. Aki thanks for the purchase and finally asks the man to leave his signature on a contract made by Jared. Reading the paper, the adventurer is a bit hesitant, but he knows that this is his only chance. Then he signs the paper and immediately drinks the potion. Jared says it will take 30 minutes for Tolan to feel the effects of the medicine, so the adventurer could rest a bit. The man says he bought it because he trusted Aki, but if it's a fraud, he would take revenge on our protagonist. But before he could say what he would do, Jared states that if it's a scam, he would give the man 1,000 gold coins as compensation. Tolan, convinced, leaves, and Jared simply watches the man walk away. Aki informs Hayes and Jared that he will spread some bait before officially starting to sell. Jared takes the opportunity to start making the medicine again, and upon seeing the equipment's information, he realizes that the production skill bug was working. He explains that in the game Paradise, proficiency in medicine production is based on the quantity produced. Some powerful medicines, like the cure for Ranella's disease, may suffer a 24-hour penalty that prevents gaining more experience. But if the product's ownership changes to someone else, except for the XP, all other data about the medicine will be transferred to its new owner. In other words, the 24-hour penalty will apply to the buyer. 2 hours later, as they finish the preparations, Hayes comments that Aki was late. Jared, confident, responds that the young man will be there soon. Suddenly, a huge rumble shakes the entire place. Looking into the distance, Hayes asks his lord to see something, and looking in that direction, the lord sees several people running towards where the two were. Hayes panics, not understanding why those people were running in their direction, and everyone realizes that Aki was accompanied by the first customer and several other adventurers. The whole crowd rushes to buy the medicine sold by Jared. A commotion over who would be first in line ensues, and Hayes starts trembling. Hearing some good comments about Kribia, young Jared feels somewhat happy. But shortly after, hearing some criticisms about his country, the boy becomes irritated. Aki tells the entire crowd that he will start selling the medicine only that day and warns that anyone who wants to buy the potion on other days will have to go to Kribia. The boy also warns that since the Nightmare Forest has few hunters, adventurers who go to Kribia can have fun in the forest and acquire the potion at a lower price. Jared and Hayes begin frantically serving all the customers while Aki continues his advertisement. Without hesitation, seeing the young man's charisma, all the adventurers buy the potions. After a long day of work, it was already night, and it was snowing. Inside a residence where they were staying, Jared thinks that the profit from the medicine sales was 12,200 in gold. If he converted that to Brazilian reais, it would be approximately 53 million reais, proving that monster hunters were indeed wealthy. Someone suddenly surprises the Lord and asks if he was satisfied with today's profits. Jared asks this person why they were wandering around instead of sleeping, and Aki replies that he just came to ask for his other wish. The blonde remembers that the young merchant had only asked for one wish and that there was still one more, so he asks what it would be. Aki bows and states that he wishes to be Jared's vassal and manage a trading company under the Lord's supervision. The young man affirms that he is still an inexperienced merchant, but if Jared gave him a chance, he would build the best trading company in the north. Hearing this, the Lord mentions that the boy had a lot of courage for someone who had been kidnapped by bandits. Smiling, the boy says he was already thinking of having Aki as an employee, but being an official of trade, someone at the center of Cribia, was not an easy position to obtain. Aki says he knew that, so the Lord responds that he will give him the position because he promised to grant the boy's wish. He adds that the boy's vision of seeing the potential for Cribia's development and his ambition to reach such a high position were admirable qualities. The boy thanks him, extremely proud, and Jared tells him to go to sleep because they would return to Cribia's territory the next day. Going to the balcony, the blonde thinks he was happy to feel the warm spring wind, as in his territory, the wind is always cold. Back in the territory, a few days pass, and Jared informs that, thanks to the bug, his skills in mixing medicines and creating potions have risen to level 35. Using the automatic production they bought, 24 bottles of medicine can be produced in a single day, and each bottle is sold for 39 gold, meaning they earn 900 gold per day. Since it is sold only in Cribia, the hunters who went to take the medicine also stayed to hunt in the Nightmare Forest, and thus the number of mana stones increased. Thanks to the rumors that spread, merchants from the region also went to visit Cribia to profit from the changes in the territory. The territory of Cribia had become more prosperous than even Jared had planned, as it gradually became famous for its achievements in medicine. In a mysterious place, a horse can be seen at high speed. Isabella questions where Jared was going, as the boy was heading in an extremely isolated direction. The girl thinks that for some reason the young man wanted to take his own life and becomes desperate. The blonde retorts that the girl was wrong and explains that he was going to defeat Lich Delek. Isabella becomes even more furious, stating that this was much worse than suicide. She explains that Lich is a powerful and cursed dark mage, and if the young man is caught, his soul will be stolen and he will become undead. The boy comments that the girl didn't need to worry because he knew how to attack and defend himself against Lich. He explains that Delek is a lich who is sealed in the Silver Mountain, a fortress that the creature itself created. In the Great War of Paradise, he was chosen by the Demon King, so his seal was broken and Delek was granted eternal life. The boy thinks that when the Dark Mage becomes stronger, it will be impossible to defeat him using a sword or magic, although he can still be killed with holy magic. Breaking his concentration, Isabella says that the boy was strange because he knew too much, and she asks if Jared could be a disguised god or someone from another world. As the journey ends, our protagonist arrives at the Silver Fortress, which belongs to Lich. Entering the place, the young man begins to search for something in the middle of the vast castle. He comments that what he was looking for was a very small gap and difficult to find. Seeing the boy crawling, Isabella comments that he looked like a puppy searching for a bone. Isabella doesn't understand why Jared isn't doing anything to find Lich, and the boy informs her that, normally, to reach the boss, you need to get to the highest part of the mountain. However, there are many traps there, and even he would find it difficult to get through them all. Isabella just needed to look around and see the frozen corpses at the entrance, caught by the traps. After so much searching, Jared finally finds what he wanted and begins to pass through the wall. The boy explains that there, hidden, was a secret passage. More than ever, the boy was happy to be able to use that shortcut bugs, since he was the one who discovered that error in the game. The boy thinks that for some reason, there was a gap in the modeling of the Silver Mountain, and thanks to that bug, he had a way to defeat Delek. Jared finally arrives in a room filled with treasures, and Isabella is shocked. Our protagonist comments that this was the reward for the people who managed to defeat Delek, and that's why there was so much treasure and more than 10 artifacts. After searching for what he wanted, the boy finds the artifact he was looking for. The Lady of Greed melts a gem in the shape of a ring. Placing the gem on his finger, he explains to Isabella that this artifact wasn't an ordinary ring. It was an infinite storage space that, when activated, begins to suck in all the riches that were in the room. Isabella asks if it was okay to steal from Delek, since even she, an evil spirit, wasn't a match for a lich. The blonde states that they weren't stealing because everything in that place belonged to humans, so they were just doing justice. But seeing Jared adorned with several jewels, the girl comments that he was really enjoying it. Up above in the cave's peak, imprisoned on a throne, a skeletal figure moves. The cursed dark mage comments that thanks to that damned saint, he lost his slaves and is trapped on his own throne. Delek states that if he could break his seal, he would turn all the humans in that world into undead and make them all suffer for eternity. However, a hand reaches for the creature's head, and Jared states that the man should be reflecting on his mistakes and not fantasizing about his revenge. The old man is startled by the presence of that human and asks who he was. Jared doesn't even answer the question, and after touching the mage, he casts a fire spell on him. Immediately afterward, he claims to be a rising hero in that world. The Lich, now in a fully skeletal form, asks how our protagonist managed to get through all the traps and illusions. Seeing that Lich was still fine even after the attack, Jared steps back from the undead. He thinks that Deluk is a mage who traded his own humanity for power, strength, and eternal life. Since he no longer has a physical body, he is forced to use a magical manifestation remotely controlled through a vessel of energized life force. However, Deluk lost his life force vessel to a saint and was forcibly chained to a body. Now severely weakened, if he dies, he won't be able to resurrect. Jared remarks that he has to maintain the correct distance between himself and his target to avoid Lich's dark magic, which absorbs life. After all, he had fought this opponent several times before. Dodging a few strikes, the young man prepares an attack called Lightning Flash and quickly launches it at his opponent. Defending himself with a red barrier, the undead claims that it is useless. However, he doesn't notice that several attacks strike him from behind. The mage asserts that Jared didn't need to waste so many arrows at once, as he would deplete his mana if he continued like that, which would be better for him. Lich realizes that the flames cast by our protagonist are burning his body with holy power. Upon analyzing, he notices that the boy had stolen the saint's artifact that can grant the holy attribute to attacks and asks how the young man found his treasure. Finally, Deluk comments that this is strange and therefore it would be better to get rid of Jared as soon as possible, and he begins to prepare a spell. Our protagonist remains unfazed and states that he was there to meet his favorite old mage and should be treated a little better. He then breaks Lich's barrier and prepares another attack. The young man strikes the skeleton with a fireball and immediately passes by him. Jared thinks that the tactic of attacking Lich before the undead could counterattack is working. Preparing an attack with his staff, the young man also comments that while there may not be a quick way to defeat Deluk, if he keeps applying the same pressure, he will win. Deluk thinks that his opponent knew exactly what to do, but still, this was his territory and he had the advantage. He then orders his knights to rise and several skeletal creatures begin to emerge. Finally, he commands all those skeletons to punish our protagonist and the monsters obey. Isabella panics and tries to warn her master that the undead were approaching, but he already knew. Jared realizes that this was not a standard move from Deluk and supposes that the skeleton acted this way because he had not yet been fully resurrected. The Lich thanks Jared for allowing him to feel the rage of his suffering once more, and now that the holy flames are gone, he will show his true strength. While fleeing from the army of skeletal knights, the blonde thinks that he needs to engage Lich in close combat to prevent the mage from using high-level spells. Isabella states that she will take care of the undead and then begins to possess a horned skeleton. The giant's companions don't understand why the skeleton was acting that way. Looking closely, they realize that the creature was no longer the same and now the monster had red eyes. The evil spirit remarks that she wasn't pretty, but certainly that was a powerful body, and she begins to attack her own teammates. Lich becomes irritated when he sees that person interrupting his battle and attacks her. The skeleton uses a spell on the body that Isabella possessed, breaking half of the giant skeleton. Seeing that he has an opportunity, Jared thanks Isabella and then throws a lightning spear at his opponent. Upon being hit, the powerful skeleton writhes in pain, and at that moment, our protagonist states that more lightning attacks are on the way and launches them at his enemy. The Dark Mage comments that he wouldn't fall for that trick again and raises a bone wall to shield himself from the attack. However, for some reason, the lightning strike begins to pierce through the barrier and goes through Lich's chest. The skeleton can't believe what he's seeing and asks if his opponent had cast 2 spells at once. Confident in his victory, the blonde claims that this was his own style of magic and that Deluk had underestimated him. Immediately afterward, he uses his staff along with the ring he had taken and begins charging his spell with the holy attribute. After hitting Deluk squarely, the skeleton burns in despair. With the attack, Lich can be seen unconscious on his throne. Isabella, who was possessing the skeleton's body, still can't believe that the two of them had defeated Deluk. Jared, seeing this, walks slowly toward the mage's body. Lich, who seemed dead, shows that he was not and suddenly launches a sneaky attack on Jared. However, already expecting that, the boy counters, striking his opponent's skull. Using his mind's eye, the boy states that he knew Lich wouldn't die from just that attack. This time, he uses his healing ability with the holy attribute and places his palm over the skeleton's chest. Once again, the creature groans in pain as it refuses to believe it's going to die in such a way. He thinks that the true taste of death after becoming a Lich was strange, and even though his instincts screamed for him to flee from that man, the seal prevented him from doing so. But changing his demeanor, Deluk declares that fear and death didn't exist for him, and that made him laugh. The demon claims he is a Lich, the bearer of plague, and the one who rules over death. And charging all this purple energy, the skeleton says that he is Lich Deluk. After invoking his true power and taking on a new form, the demon comments that he will now play with Jared. With a massive release of purple energy, an explosion occurs, destroying much of the place. Still bound by his chains, the Lich begins to emit a dark aura, and to avoid it, Jared defends himself with a blue shield. Our protagonist remarks that the mage was just casting spells at him, to the point where it could hardly be called magic. After so many spells are cast against his barrier, it shatters and the boy falls into despair. Lich unleashes a wave of aura at the boy and orders him to die immediately. Jared can only watch as a powerful strike comes toward him, frozen in complete shock. However, Isabella immediately steps in to defend him, preventing the attack from reaching her husband. Seeing his battle interrupted once again, the Dark Mage grows furious and declares that the demon would no longer interfere. Delic pierces the chest of the skeleton, commanding the creature to vanish, destroying it completely. Isabella leaves the skeleton's body and tells Jared that this is as far as she can go, asking if the boy is sure he can win. The boy states that Delic won't be able to move a finger against him while in that state, so everything will be fine. Shin says that he was confused by Lich's appearance and powers at first, but he still hadn't changed his patterns. Just like any other monster in paradise, Tapang knew everything about Delic. Whether it was the way he attacked or dodged, it didn't matter. He knew it all. So our protagonist advances toward the creature. Lich calls the young man a little rat and comments that it's time for Jared to be crushed. As a result, a hand appears above the boy. Jared adds that he even knew all his enemy's tricks and easily dodges the attack. Surprised that his opponent managed to evade that strike, the Dark Mage bursts into laughter. The blonde arrogantly states that the one thing he was certain of was that he would defeat that skeleton. But the creature responds that it's unlikely, as the young man was too busy dodging the blows. Suddenly, right in front of Lich, Jared appears and declares that he will definitely defeat the skeleton. Delic realizes that his enemy used a 4th-class spell, and from the beginning, Jared had only been pretending to be weak. Confident, the boy begins to invoke a golden aura, while stating that he was always 100% sure of himself. He uses the spell Magical Fortification, and a golden aura begins to cover the chains that imprisoned Lich. Seeing his enemy in agony, the boy says that a scoundrel like him, without any merit, is easy to strike down. Finally, he comments that Lich should feel the blessing of God flowing through his entire body. The young man thrusts his hand through the skeleton's ribs and uses a divine blessing ability once again. A strong light begins to radiate through the Dark Mage's entire body and pierce even through his skull. That light expands throughout the area, momentarily blinding everyone present. As the dust settles, Jared observes the skeleton. Then the boy asks Delic to give up, as the Demon King won't appear anytime soon. The Dark Mage replies that he will decide when to give up, as a terrible future awaits Jared. Finally, even with only a portion of the skull remaining, he threatens the boy, stating that he should consider what he will have to face from that day forward. Our protagonist seems unfazed by the demon's words and continues to mock him, treating him like trash. Delic realizes that the young blonde had a deep desire in his soul and questions what the boy wanted. With a serious expression, the Lord of Cribia declares that he desired the most powerful symbol of the monarchy, which belonged to Delic. The skeleton starts laughing, saying that Jared must be drunk, as he was trying to accomplish something that neither the Lord of the Gods nor the devil himself could achieve. As he was about to leave, Delic remarked that it had been very entertaining, and that he would be watching the boy from hell through his priceless eyes. Seeing this scene, Isabella thought that part of Jared was quite frightening. Even though there were many people stronger than the boy, he didn't care, as if he knew that one day he would surpass them all. After Lich disappeared, Jared collected a bracelet that had been attached to the skeleton's body, and the boy remarked that it was incredible, as growth-type artifacts were by far the best. Hugging the object, he commented that there was no better artifact than that one, and was very happy to have obtained it. Isabella noticed a strange book on the ground and quickly informed the Lord. She assumed it must be something Lich left behind, and our protagonist thought that, in the game Paradise, Lich had never dropped a book. On the book's cover, it was written that the artifact contained information about Lich's resurrection spell. After reading the artifact, Isabella began to summarize, explaining that whoever is resurrected would have a contract with the master who revived them. Reading more details about the contract, Isabella stated that if she accepted it, she would practically become Jared's slave. Then she became irritated, declaring that this wasn't the type of relationship she was looking for, and asked why the blonde wanted her to be revived. The Lord explained that firstly, he wanted to be pleasantly bound by the girl. Secondly, she would use the curse magic on him, and the young man would defend himself as best he could. As she listened, Isabella misunderstood his intention. Finally, Jared confirmed that thirdly, they would repeat the process, enhancing his resistance and magical tolerance at the same time. Isabella then realized what it was about. She looked at our protagonist with disdain and contempt, which irritated him. The young woman asked if that was all, and Jared requested that she think fondly about the other uses that could benefit both of them. Sighing, the demoness agreed, as she was growing tired of her old, boring routine and wanted to return to being human. He quickly began walking, saying that the resurrection chamber was nearby, though the young woman hesitated, not feeling ready yet. After some time, for some reason, the Lord of Cribia was extremely out of breath, carrying a beautiful woman on his back. He asked why he had to carry Isabella, and the young woman explained that she wasn't comfortable with that body, and also asked to be called Bella from now on. The Lord stated that he thought she had said she lost her memories after becoming human and wondered how she could remember her own name. The girl simply replied that she didn't know. She also explained that she was in that body because Deluk had various fantasies about the human form, but she was irritated that Lich didn't have decent clothing. Our protagonist thought he was glad Bella hadn't changed, but somehow her tendencies were exactly the same, and she even seemed more emotional. Walking back toward the exit of the place, they passed by various bodies. Bella noticed the many corpses around them, and our protagonist commented that the place was full of traps. In a flashback before the resurrection of the evil spirit, the body Isabella was using was preserved in a capsule, and both she and Jared wondered what had happened to the young woman. The demoness commented that she hoped the girl wouldn't become an evil spirit, as living as an evil spirit was difficult. Even without senses, one felt lonely. Back in the present moment, Isabella thought that perhaps the woman who owned that body would be happier living a fulfilling life through it. That's why, from that day on, she planned to eat lots of delicious food while trying out new dresses and makeup. The girl asked if Jared would find that fun, and he agreed. Finally, the young woman nestled against our protagonist's back while he said he was glad to have a trusted companion. Feeling Jared's touch, she fell asleep in that position. Elsewhere, the Lord of Ranella was extremely angry, as he had received news that more hunters had been lost in his region. His assistant explained that due to the cure for Ranella's disease, which could only be found in Kribia's territory, hunters had been heading there. The noble, upon hearing this, became even more enraged, as that was precisely the reason they had spent a fortune hiring people to steal a cure. Even so, the assistant tried to explain that, unfortunately, Kribia had strong controls over the recipe for that potion. Upon hearing this, the chief of the region becomes completely enraged and questions how his soldier could say such a thing, as he was hired to acquire the cure. Afterward, the man throws several books at his subordinate, ordering him to leave. Irritated, he thinks that Jared must be feeling like a know-it-all, but he doesn't yet know the true evil of this world. Batman, furious and thinking about what he's going to do, declares that the two can play that game. Sitting on his throne, the Lord of Malurka was planning something. He asks his subordinate how many men they could send against the enemy if he declared war immediately. The pundit assassin explains that currently they have 1,239 qualified men at their lord's disposal. Hearing this, the lord thinks that it is still too few and that they need more men, as Jared is a fourth-class mage. Horgoz also mentions that he would have sent Gragas to take care of Jared long ago if he had known this would happen, revealing that he had to silence Gragas with an assassin. The subordinate informs him that the great guide of Malurka has arrived, and the lord is pleased that his favorite mage is finally there. Alfred was a powerful man who wielded a high-quality staff. The mage informs him that he brought the mages Horgoz had requested. Horgoz then approaches the hired mages and asks them a few questions. Afterward, Akrun says that if they attacked Kribia immediately, the territory would be wiped off the face of the earth. Hearing this, the Lord of Malurka is delighted, declaring that it's perfect. Meanwhile, Jared was on a mission, heading to the lands of the northernmost end of the region with his subordinates. Along the way, Avila comments to her lord that she didn't even know that was a territory, as it was right between Malurka and Tanella. Jared then mentions that they were not there on official business, but to make a deal with the tribe living there. The lord, on his course, finally comments that everyone will soon discover which tribe resides in that region. At the top of the mountains, some creatures observe the arrival of the visitors. Our protagonist's assistant, upon looking up, notices something and sees that a tribe of red goblins is about to attack the carriages. Orin comments that he thought they were the only ones in that land, but now they were completely surrounded, and the tribe of goblins could be seen encircling all of Jared's soldiers. The general of the soldiers declares that they should begin their task of protecting the lord, and so they do. However, Lacus orders all the soldiers to form a defensive perimeter and not attack the monsters, leaving the soldiers confused. Avila doesn't understand why they should create a defensive perimeter against monsters, but she quickly realizes something. Amid the small goblins, a long-limbed creature appears and welcomes the humans. The leader of the red goblins introduces himself as Eboniba. Hearing this, Orin thinks that this was a goblin speaking the Nasu dialect, which was impressive. Jared introduces himself to Eboniba, and the goblin asks why the young man had called for that meeting. The Lord of Kribia comments that they wish to establish diplomatic relations for the acquisition of gold. Eboniba asks if Jared had what they needed, and the blonde orders his soldiers to bring it forth. Avila, upon seeing a mountain of precious stones, thinks that it didn't make any sense. It is revealed that they were nightmare stones, and Jared asks if it was enough to satisfy the goblin's needs. Meanwhile, Avila and another subordinate think that those stones are usually found in the nightmare forest and are worth absolutely nothing. Lekhiz, in his thoughts, confirms that nightmare stones are beautiful gems typically captured by monster hunters in the nightmare forest. Eboniba pauses for a moment and analyzes the precious stones. The goblin chief, seemingly irritated, says that no human had ever bothered to talk to the goblins before, but at their first meeting, Jared had brought this. However, the monster reveals that he was extremely pleased and declares that the Lord of Kribia did well. He comments that Jared had traveled for a long time just to deliver those precious stones, and for that, he thanks the Lord. After that, the goblin signs a contract and states that with this, they have become brothers of the North. The Lord comments that he hopes the relationship between him and the goblins will become even stronger, and the Goblin King expresses that he feels the same way. Ebeniba orders his minions to bring iron and gold, and the small goblins promptly obey. The small red goblins bring several sacks, and when they place them on the ground, it is revealed that they are filled with iron and gold. While all the humans are shocked by the sight of those minerals, the only thing the goblins do is admire the nightmare stones. A man working for Jared thought that the goblins had an absurd amount of minerals, and that it would be even better to claim their land. The Goblin King warned that they couldn't send their new brothers off without a celebration, so they would throw a feast. For some reason, the monster said there was no longer a need for protection, and that creatures could step out of formation. At the top of the mountains, a group of hidden elves revealed themselves after Ebeniba allowed them to step down. The man who had previously plotted against the goblins was shocked when he realized that the elves were allied with the goblins. He thought that his lord must have known about this too, which is why he decided to make an alliance with that tribe. There was also a race that lived even further north than the Red Goblins, and they couldn't be dismissed as forming alliances with more tribes provided various benefits. They had a close relationship with the Dark Elves of Tatar Island, who lived on the adjacent island, enough to be part of the treaty. The man commented that Ebeniba was known to be intelligent and a wise leader, with many connections to other tribes. The old man thought that if they blindly attacked the Red Goblins, their bodies would disappear, never to be found again. During a celebration, several races could be seen gathered around a bonfire. Lavilla approached Jared and commented on how amazing it was that goblins treated nightmare stones the way humans treated gold, and she asked how her lord knew about that. At that moment, all the mixed races were drinking and having fun together in peace. The Dark Elves were even arm wrestling with the humans. During the celebration, Jared called for Lakiz, and the man approached him. The Lord asked what the current state of the army and blacksmiths was, and Lakiz explained that due to a lack of materials to forge new weapons, they were focusing on improving the existing ones. Our protagonist stated that now that they had obtained refined iron from the Red Goblins, they should focus on mass-producing weapons. Lakiz acknowledged the order and said he would inform the blacksmiths. The boy also added that they should use part of the gold obtained from the Red Goblins to further invest in the army, and Lakiz would be in charge of recruitment. Ebeniba, who was listening, asked if the boy was planning to declare war on Malurka. The goblin said there was no other reason for such a sudden and large-scale deal except for war. He remarked that Jared was clever, as Malurka was a nest full of corrupt and criminal individuals who would soon spread their influence to Cribia. Jared apologized in case Ebeniba was offended by the reason for the agreement, but the goblin responded that it wasn't an issue. The goblin chief commented that in any case, the amount of iron and gold was nothing to them, and he also hated Horgos, so he was rooting for Cribia. Ebeniba raised a cup and toasted to his new brother Jared and to the glory of Cribia. All the races joined in the toast, and even Jared, who was a bit embarrassed, raised his glass with the tribe. However, suddenly his expression changed completely, and an intense hatred took over the boy's body. On March 14, 1414, Jared's mansion was in view. Jared explained that it had been 4 weeks since Isabella's resurrection, and that to admit her into the house, the Lord had to make up a lie for Hayes. It goes without saying that Isabella quickly adapted to life in the mansion, and daily she helped Jared increase his magical defense levels with her powers. Thanks to her, our protagonist gained 34 points in magical defense. After their daily training, Isabella received some chocolates from Jared and questioned what they were. Intrigued, the woman asked if the boy was trying to make her gain weight. Embarrassed, the boy explained that he gave them to her as a gift, as this was the day when a man gives sweets to a woman. Isabella was confused, as it wasn't a special day, and the boy explained that it was a celebration from the Eastern continent. He informed her that a month ago, on February 14, women give chocolates to men, and the celebration on March 14 is the opposite. The girl asked if he was in love, but the Lord cut her off, stating that he gave sweets to all the women in the mansion. Isabella became irritated, putting a chocolate in her mouth, and said that Jared used people to promote himself, but still wasn't willing to give his heart to her. The woman tried to kiss our protagonist, saying that their lives were intertwined through the mind's eye, as their contract was eternally bound by a kiss. Immediately after, the boy forced her to swallow the chocolate and asked her to stop playing around. The Lord states that now that they have significantly increased their magical resistance levels, they will focus on doubling the strength of the curse. As a form of revenge, Isabella teases that they will start with a love spell to enchant Jared. The young man tries to resist, but the girl isn't willing to take no for an answer. And after being enchanted, Jared manages to meet the minimum requirements to reach the 5th class. The narrator introduces us to the Stimulation Project, which aims to find the brilliant talents of the future and recruit them to Cribia's side. There are several other reasons for Jared's growing investment in this project aside from acquiring talent for training. One of the main reasons is to receive the benefits granted by the priest's disciplinary system, which gives bonus rewards to the teacher based on the progress of Jared's students. By far, the most talented student was Isabella, who always excelled. Lena was another talented individual who accepted the tasks given to her without question. The third and penultimate student was Mia, who viewed any form of training as a game and did it for fun. The tips and tricks that Jared had learned over the years were used to develop his students, offering no problem to his final plan. At least that's what Jared believed. However, he had one student who was the worst, and because of her, he ended up being ambushed. Hayes is seen questioning how a mere servant could call the Lord a teacher. She says she shouldn't treat him so informally, but she will do her best in training to become the greatest healer in the world. Jared thinks that unlike a cleric, a healer is predominantly focused and specialized in healing, and it is one of the highest classes, with only 5 in Nasu. Our protagonist becomes frustrated with Hayes as the girl was basing all her values in life solely on being a servant, and she apologizes for it. In a meeting room, the blonde boy tells someone that he isn't making any progress with Hayes. Sipping tea, the young man states that to awaken as a healer, the girl needs to strengthen her body and mind. Oren, who was with his lord, says that since birth, Hayes had followed the path of a servant, so training her wouldn't be easy. Jared agrees, acknowledging that something was holding her back internally, and unconsciously, the young woman was pessimistic about her situation. Concerned, the boy thinks he needs to guide her down the right path, but doesn't know how. The wise man has an idea and places his teacup on the table. He says that Jared has shown an innovative and versatile mind in the most challenging situations, which is why everyone in Cribia is grateful for what he has done. However, the boy doesn't need to do everything alone, and Hayes had sacrificed everything for him until now. The young woman would evolve on her own, and that's why Jared should trust her. Finally, Oren concludes that Jared is human and needs a bit of rest. However, being stubborn, the blonde boy misunderstands and thinks it's some sort of tactic. He devises an evil plan and immediately opens the door to the room and runs out. Walking through the corridors, the boy declares that he should have thought of this years ago, as Hayes wasn't like the others and all she needed was a professional approach. While thinking this, the young man doesn't notice the assassin approaching from behind, ready to strike. For some reason, Hayes is completely desperate and worried about something. She sees Jared's body collapse with a massive wound on his chest. Hayes asks how this happened, and a soldier beside Jared says that the Lord was ambushed by an assassin. The man also says they should call a doctor, but it was a dire situation. The girl insists that they should take the Lord to the doctor quickly. However, looking at her Lord's condition, she realizes the doctors wouldn't arrive in time. Hayes declares that she's a healer and must take action with her own hands. The girl kneels and asks her Lord to be patient and hold on a little longer. Crying, she attempts to use her healing power on Jared to save him. Hayes couldn't take it anymore and begins to beg for it to work. Memories flood her mind, and she declares that she couldn't let Jared die like this, as she had promised to always be by her Lord's side. Then, a strong energy emerges from her hands, and a healing power begins to flow throughout our protagonist's body. 30 minutes later, upon discovering that it was all part of a plan, the girl tells her Lord, the soldier, and the assassin that the 3 of them were terrible. Crying, the young woman declares that even though it was meant to help her, it was a very cruel plan. The Lord tries to explain, saying it was just a small cut and that they used a bit of animal blood to exaggerate it. He then asks Hayes how she feels now that she has become a healer. Hayes completely loses it, saying that the feeling was terrible. She also scolds the other 2 who assisted Jared, stating that even though it was a direct order from the Lord, it was a ridiculous plan. Finally, the maid comments that she hated seeing Jared hurt and runs out of the room immediately. Oren remarks that this wasn't what he meant when he told Jared to trust Hayes, and he scolds the Lord for his actions. In the territory of Malurka, a man can be seen smoking as he declares that if they declare war on Cribia, it should be an easy victory. The man with black and white hair states that, in reality, all they need to do is kill Jared to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, as war is expensive. He orders his subordinate to infiltrate the mansion and spy on the Lord of Cribia, but if the opportunity arises, he is to kill him. The assassin manages to infiltrate the mansion, and we see the exact moment he witnesses Jared running after he had come up with his devious plan. However, not knowing it was a setup, the spy is incredulous when he sees a green-haired boy attacking Jared. Outraged, the spy can't believe what he is seeing. He doesn't understand why other groups besides Mallorca are after Jared and decides to retreat, choosing not to attack Jared that day. On another day, a heavy snowstorm can be seen falling over the nightmare forest near Cribia. Lacus braves the storm as he ventures into the forest searching for something. He sees a light, and the person in front of him asks who he is. An old man carrying a lantern recognizes Lacus and calls him by name. Later, in the old man's cabin, the elder serves tea to Cribia's chief of security. He comments that the boy has grown since the last time he saw him and asks him to sit down and drink. As he lights a fire, the elder asks why the boy is there, deep in the nightmare forest. Lacus explains that there have been new developments in Cribia recently, and he wanted to share them with the old man. He then places a potion on the table and explains that it's the cure for Renella's disease, commenting that the old man might need it out here in the forest. The elder is impressed, recognizing it as the famous cure everyone has been talking about, but he says nothing more about it. The old man expresses his doubts, remarking that such a cure was created by a leader as conniving as Jared. Lacus explains that Lord Jared has changed and learned from his past, and he was the one who allowed the boy to come to the cabin. The elder laughs, saying that the Lord was willing to throw away men just to save a few others. However, knowing that his Lord had truly changed, the Chief of Security insists that veterans like the old man are needed in times like these. He adds that he guarantees the old man would change his mind if he could see how much Cribia has evolved. The narrator then tells us that never in the history of the Nasu continent had there been a war so destructive. Lives returned to dust, and the heads of countless nobles rolled. Morality and ethics. They become meaningless when one is simply trying to survive in such times. And there was reason to fear, after all, death rode on horseback from one end of the Nasu continent to the other. In a tavern, our protagonist is drinking beer, commenting that the drink is truly refreshing. The young man also eats some seafood, praising it since the place is near the ocean. Isabella, disguised along with her lord, comments that the young man is relying on seafood because the cold makes it impossible to grow anything in Cribia. Reluctantly, Jared agrees with her, admitting that she was right, as his only hope is that the fertilizers he made will have some effect on the crops this time. Hayes tries to cheer her lord up, saying she's sure the fertilizers will work well since it was Jared who created them. Behind them, a group of adventurers begins talking about how the roads have been clean and safe lately. They start praising the Lord of Cribia, as everyone sees a wonderful future ahead under his leadership. The man not only has the cure for Ranella, but also many potions, and it even seems like a good idea to buy land in Cribia. The hunters continue to discuss moving the base of their guild to Cribia, and upon hearing this, both Isabella and Hayes smiled slightly. The former demoness commented that it was a good idea for them to infiltrate the tavern quietly, but Jared wasn't paying attention. His gaze was fixed on someone else. A rough woman slammed her beer mug on the table, exclaiming how incredible everything was. The red-haired woman called for another round from the bartender. Then she turned to her apprentice and asked if she wanted a drink too. Upon hearing her voice, our protagonist recognized the woman and muttered her name, Ella, the Mad Warrior. He thought to himself that she was a warrior NPC, famous for helping players during the first major crisis in Paradiso's history. But the only problem was that she'd be willing to join the Demon King's army if the pay was right. The young man also felt as though he recognized the woman next to Ella and activated his mind's eye to be sure. He realized that the woman was Chloe, the Queen of Silence, and wondered what she was doing there. Jared explained that 5 years before the Great Stallion War, an NPC, Chloe, emerged as the Queen of the Grey Elves at the age of 38. She had been raised in secret. The boy also thought that Ella shouldn't be in the north, and Chloe shouldn't be wandering around freely either. Finally, he realized that he had just encountered some of the most important figures in Paradiso's history all in one place, and he knew he had to act. With a look of extreme satisfaction, he whispered that he couldn't wait to try to bring them to his side. Jared approached Ella's table, telling Hayes and Isabella they could continue chatting. He excused himself and politely asked to speak with Ella. However, the woman misunderstood, saying she wasn't interested in younger men so he could leave. Already 25 years old, Jared felt incredibly annoyed by Ella's comment and collapsed to the floor in disbelief. Hayes, irritated, marched over to Ella's table and excused herself. She firmly stated that the blonde man was the Lord of Cribia, a viscount of the continent, and requested that the women show him respect. Everyone around them was shocked to hear that Jared was present. Ella stood up, remarking that Hayes seemed like a mere servant and should be scared. The Mad Warrior also commented that being a viscount was no big deal, as there were plenty of nobles in the world. Our protagonist hugged Hayes to calm her and interrupted Ella's rage, asking if he could have a bit of her time, guaranteeing she would be compensated. The woman apologized, explaining she had thought Jared was hitting on her. Stating that the bar was already buzzing, Jared suggested they go somewhere quieter to talk. After a brief negotiation, Ella repeated everything Jared had said, questioning if they would really receive 5,000 gold coins a year and a mansion included, all to train a child. Our protagonist agreed, stating that this was just the first payment, and of course, they would need to draft and sign a contract to guarantee everything. Chloe, who had been sitting beside her mentor, commented that she would follow whatever Ella decided, as the human world was all the same to her. Ella asked why Jared trusted her, given that Chloe had only recently become her apprentice, and this was her first time in the north. The Lord admitted that he didn't trust them yet, which is why money was the only way to convince them to stay. Jared thought that the two would help him as long as he incentivized them with money, and therefore there was no chance of them refusing. Additionally, he mentally noted that Ella had never been able to find a place to call home due to her personality. The Mad Maid was overjoyed with the proposal, saying she liked it and promptly accepted. She then loudly asked where the child that needed training was. Later that night, Jared reflected on how he had already resolved the matter of finding a teacher for Lena. He remarked that in the past he would be exhausted by now, but thanks to the Gorza's necklace, he didn't feel tired. As he wrote in his journal, the young man reflected that all his experiences and knowledge from Paradiso were slowly fading with time. Even earlier that day, he had completely forgotten what Chloe looked like. Additionally, it would be difficult to write in peace in that journal if the territory continued to grow at this rate. So the boy definitely wanted to leave a record behind in Korean, a language unknown to this world. Finally, he finishes writing down all the knowledge of the world in that book and closes it. The cover reads Paradiso. The chapter begins by showing the intensity of Lima's training, where she's tasked with carrying heavy wooden towers. Seeing the situation, Jared thinks that the training looks like hell and wonders if the girl will turn into a muscle-bound monster. Curious, the young man asks Ella why Chloe's working so hard without even breaking a sweat. Ella explains that the world is vast and that Lena isn't the only talented child out there. Ella also adds, quite frankly, that whoever taught Lena up until now was, at best, a terrible teacher. She remarks that she could probably kill that person in 5 seconds with one hand, and upon hearing this, the blonde boy feels a bit sorry for Lakiz. Ella goes on to say that even without a decent teacher, Lena would still become strong thanks to her magical training equipment. The 4 elemental magics targeted and released by the installed equipment do an excellent job of training her ability to use a shield. Finally, the woman asks how Jared found the perfect training method for Lena, and the boy responds that it's just a common method from the Eastern continent. He explains in his thoughts that with the system, proficiency decreases over time if the same training methods are used repeatedly. However, with 4 different elements, the system always recognizes it as a unique training method. In other words, it's a bug that bypasses anti-macro training methods. Looking at Ella, the boy thinks he was quite surprised as the woman understood Lena's condition without using the mind's eye. And considering the effectiveness of the training, he really had nothing to worry about in that area. Elsewhere, a few farmers are seen harvesting crops. Seeing Mr. Oren, the men are happy to see him and ask what he needs. Oren informs them that he's there for a routine inspection and asks how the crops are doing. One of the farmers says there isn't much to report as everything has been peaceful since the pests started being exterminated. He adds that with that, the pests migrated to Renella's territory. Another farmer comments that they are grateful to Mr. Oren and the Lord every day for allowing them to work in that field. Hearing this, the old man praises them for their hard work, leaving the farmers flattered. With that, the farmers begin singing great praises in Jared's name, and Cribia enters a golden age, with the entire territory receiving a buff. In the city, people continue to chant the name of the Lord of Cribia, satisfied with Jared's governance. During this period, Hayes was working hard in the village to organize imperial affairs, while Lena and Chloe trained tirelessly. In his mansion, looking at the system, our protagonist realizes that another golden age has arrived, making him very happy. Meanwhile, Akroon was on his way to Cribia, and the mage commented that he had heard a lot about the well-being of that territory lately. However, things wouldn't stay that way for long. At Jared's palace, the mage from Mallorca bowed, greeting the Lord. He introduced himself as Akroon and explained that he was from the territory of Mallorca and had come to personally deliver a letter to Jared. Looking at the man, our protagonist received a mission to defeat Akroon, but the young man chose to ignore it for now. Jared acted politely, greeting the man and asking if his previous tribute had been to Horgos' satisfaction. Akroon replied that yes, the Lord of Mallorca was very pleased, and that considering the history between the territories of Mallorca and Cribia, Jared's decision was praiseworthy. Hearing this, the boy became extremely irritated, realizing that Akroon was trying to subtly suggest superiority. As the two continued their conversation, Lekis and the warriors from Mallorca exchanged tense glances, building a strong tension. Finally, Akroon explained that the letter had been carefully written by the Lord of Mallorca and handed it to Jared. The boy began to read, and in summary, Horgos lamented the previous conflicts between Mallorca and Cribia and promised that from now on, they would build a healthy relationship. After reading it all, the Lord of Cribia thought to himself that Horgos was provoking him, but keeping calm, he responded to Akroon that, like any man, he desired peace. The boy also added that in the meantime, he would send the best and purest magic crystals from Cribia, sincerely hoping they would serve as a symbol of friendship. Akroon replied that his lord would surely be pleased with that. With a fake but charming smile, our protagonist says that all people from Mallorca are welcome in Cribia. In a forest, Jared is practicing his archery skills, aiming at a deer. With great skill, he hits the target, and a guard confirms the shot was perfect. Everyone from Cribia and Mallorca watching remarks that the lord is not only an excellent archer, but also highly versatile. Even Lakis claps, and Jared feels pleased with all the praise. Tired of pretending, Lakis asks his lord why he constantly acts submissive toward the bastards of Mallorca. Smiling, Jared explains that while it's true one should draw their sword when facing an enemy on the battlefield in the political arena, it's always better to smile. The knight then realizes that when you hide your true intentions, your enemy becomes careless and complacent, which was Jared's strategy. Finally, Jared explains that the legitimate strike comes at the very end, and Lycas shouldn't worry about humiliation or submission during the process. Afterward, Jared announces to everyone present that to celebrate the province's rapid development, they would have a grand banquet with the people of Mallorca. That night, everyone was enjoying themselves, drinking and feasting, forgetting about the looming war. As they ate and drank, Jared commented that now that Lakis understood the relationship with Mallorca better, he needn't worry about the war in the meantime. Laughing, the knight agreed and remarked that perhaps Cribia's golden age was truly on the horizon. At that moment, hidden in the shadows, the white-haired assassin thought Jared was being far too careless. Holding a few pieces of wood in his hands, the assassin thought the boy should enjoy his time while he could, as the next cup of wine Jared drank would be filled with his own blood. Our protagonist noticed this and understood what his enemy was planning. In his mind, Jared stated that of course there would be spies in his territory, and Top was excellent at camouflage. Without the mind's eye, he wouldn't have been able to spot him. Laughing internally, Jared thought that the day the spy reported his findings would be the same day Mallorca would march toward Cribia, and it would be the last day for that territory. Shortly after, due to the poisoned wine, Jared began to vomit and Lekis apologized, saying he should have been more vigilant. With that, another month passed, and on the morning of April 29, 1414, the sound of horses marching could be heard. The warriors of Mallorca were on their way to Cribia to attack the territory. Horgoz, leading his army, declared that Cribia would soon be his. All around the Lord's mansion in Cribia, silence settled. Lena, noticing this during her training, remarked that the mansion was far too quiet that day. She asked Klo if she knew where everyone was. At that moment, however, Ella appeared behind Lena and asked if the girl had time to chat while in the middle of her training. After the girl mispaved, Ella ordered her to run 20 laps around the field, and Lena quickly obeyed. Ella commented that Jared should have informed her that they were in the middle of a war, and as she stretched, she mentioned that she couldn't relax under these circumstances. On the battlefield, a fireball struck a wooden tower, quickly destroying it. The leader of the warriors defending the tower ordered his soldiers to retreat immediately. One of Horgo's soldiers reported that the wooden tower had been destroyed and the cavalry was retreating. He asked if they should pursue those fleeing. Horgoz told him to let them flee, as they were just fools, and he didn't believe that everyone had retreated due to the military strength in the forest. The man added that if he had known it would be this easy, he would have invaded Cribia long ago. Shortly after, his soldiers began looting the area, and after they had stolen everything, Horgoz finally decided to return to the battle. Raising his sword, the leader of Mallorca called for all his soldiers to listen and ordered them to advance toward Cribia. Meanwhile, some of Cribia's residents were being forced to flee the territory due to the war. An old man and his grandson lamented that everything had been peaceful just the day before, and now the situation was disastrous for the kingdom. On the battlefield, Jared received word that the 4th defensive line had just been broken. The retreating soldier reported that the Mallorca forces were approaching, and Jared instructed them to move quickly. The boy told Lakiz that if Mallorca destroyed that defensive position, the territory would be finished, and he urged the soldier to do his best to defend the area. At that moment, Hayes arrived at the battlefield, having been summoned by her lord. She questioned why she wasn't allowed to participate in such an important war, expressing her desire to be involved. The blonde boy responded that he couldn't bring her along, and despite her insistence, Jared explained that the battlefield was a place where even a small mistake could cost someone their life. Holding Hayes' hand, the boy remarked that, indeed, her abilities were extremely useful on the battlefield. However, he couldn't place her in a dangerous situation simply because of her talents. Tearing up, Hayes expressed that she wanted to go because she didn't want to lose her companion, and Jared gently reassured her that he understood. Our protagonist explained that he comprehended her fear, as they had been together all their lives. However, to protect those who were important, Jared said he had to be prepared. With a smile, he asked Hayes to trust him, and she reluctantly agreed. Watching this, Isabella grew extremely irritated and jealous. She then grabbed Hayes by the collar and began dragging her away, commenting that, as a healer, Hayes shouldn't be on the battlefield, but rather stay behind to heal those in need. Hayes and Jared exchanged farewells, and the young man gave her a kind smile. He then informed his soldiers that all preparations were complete, and with that, Jared donned his war helmet. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Lekis thought about Cribia's well-fortified, geographically advantageous position, but lamented that they had only 300 soldiers. The military flag had been placed in a visible position for most to see, and nearly everything was ready. The only issue left was that 100 untrained peasants had volunteered to fight. A soldier thanked the peasants for their solidarity in light of the shortage of troops. The man expressed his shame and regret that they all had to face such a situation due to the lack of an adequate military force. Lakiz continued his speech, reminding everyone that Lord Jared had only sought peace with Mallorca, even bowing to them in hopes of achieving it. Yet Mallorca still coveted Cribia. The number of soldiers with basic training had reached 1,200, so the untrained peasants were free to leave if they wished. After all, the fact that they were standing with the soldiers was already a great help. As he spoke, Lakiz had a flashback of someone calling him to leave. A few days after the death of Viscount Bury, a companion of Lakiz had said that Cribia was doomed ever since the old lord died, as the new Lord Jared was too knave. But due to his stubborn nature, Lakiz had decided to stay despite everything. His friend questioned how he could say that, especially since Lakiz had been demoted to the lowest rank. He also remarked that Cribia wouldn't survive the harsh winter ahead. Lakiz responded that, as a citizen of Cribia, he too would know his end soon, so it didn't matter. His friend gave up and turned away, telling Lakiz not to become a vengeful spirit after his death. Lakis was pulled out of his flashback by the peasants, asking him not to say such things. The peasants unanimously agreed to protect their land with their own hands, stating that thanks to Lord Jared, it had become possible to live on the once barren land. The peasants also proclaimed that they couldn't sit idly by and let the drug-addicted pigs of Mallorca steal their land. Rather than fleeing, they would prefer to fight and die on the battlefield. Hearing this, Lakis felt a surge of excitement. He thought his friend had been wrong in the past, as this winter wouldn't be difficult. On the contrary, he felt an intense warmth. Lakis quickly ordered his soldiers to distribute swords and shields to the peasants. At that moment, one of his subordinates reported that the enemy was approaching and Lakis could see them in the distance. However, the soldier mentioned an unexpected issue had arisen, and upon seeing the situation, Lakis became desperate. The enemy approaching wasn't from Mallorca, it was Lord Batman of Ranella. At that moment, Batman and his army neared Cribia, feeling pleased that they were so close. 1 month before the start of the war, a conversation between two figures revealed that, although they might have fought one another for some time, their intentions were the same. Horgos admitted that, to be honest, he wasn't happy about the situation either, but he knew it was necessary, as their rivalry with Cribia was greater. The leader of Mallorca then asked Batman if he too had recently received tributes from Cribia. Batman responded that yes, indeed, Cribia had sent a large tribute, requesting to maintain a friendly relationship between them and Ranella. Irritated, Horgos slammed the table and told Batman to consider this carefully. He exclaimed that Jared, that scoundrel, had started wagging his tail and becoming friendly after being silent for so long. Horgos also mentioned that 20% of the hunters had migrated to Cribia, and the trend was continuing to rise as Jared was attempting to shake the foundations of their territories. The leader of Mallorca claimed that Jared was scared because, even though his territories were advancing, they still weren't fully prepared. That was why he was trying to buy peace with money. The bald man explained that he had studied Cribia and knew they had only a measly 300 soldiers, to which Batman responded that the number was too small. Horgos retorted that this was exactly why Jared had tried to buy peace with money. He believed that by offering a large sum, both Mallorca and Ranella would be satisfied and decide not to attack. At least, that's what the boy thought. Therefore, Horgos declared that he wanted to form an alliance with Ranella and had already sent one of his mages to spy on Cribia. Batman was impressed, but Horgos explained that they would become allies to wage war against Cribia. He said that a month of preparation would be sufficient, and after that time they would launch a surprise attack on the territory. Horgos explained that they would establish a united front between Mallorca and Ranella, with both invading Cribia's flanks and crushing Jared and his forces. Hearing this, Batman, driven by greed, agreed to the alliance. The two shook hands, and the narrator explained that Batman and Horgos have formed an alliance with over 3,000 soldiers between them. On the surface, it appeared to be a partnership of mutual understanding with a shared goal, but each had their own hidden agenda, both secretly aiming to dominate the other's territory after defeating Cribia. Back in the present, Batman addressed the Cribian forces, boasting about how surprised and angry Jared must be to see their unexpected arrival. However, he added that Jared couldn't say anything because the boy's insolent and barbaric actions had shortened his own life. Even if Jared tried to resist, it would be in vain, as Horgos' army was already surrounding his territory. Batman also mocked Jared, saying that the boy was foolish to send his army to the front lines without even realizing there was a hidden path near his own land. Laughing, Batman declared that ignorance was a sin and Jared's territory was finished. He added that if Jared crawled on the ground and begged for his pathetic life, they might show him mercy. But as Batman watched, the supposed Lord of Cribia began removing his helmet, and when he saw who was underneath, Batman panicked. Batman realized that this wasn't Jared and demanded to know who this man was. The spy, who had been hiding in the crowd, also recognized that this wasn't the real Jared and began to question where the true Lord was. At that moment, realizing the trap, the spy dashed off, abandoning his helmet on the ground. He finally understood that it had all been a setup, and before it was too late, he needed to inform his master. However, just then, one of Jared's knights swiftly struck the fleeing spy, shattering his teeth. The green-haired assassin also appeared from behind, driving his sword into Horgos' subordinate, remarking that he was impressed there really was a spy among them. After seeing the traitor fall to the ground, the knight asked his companion what they should do next. The spy, now realizing the situation he was in, understood that they even knew his identity and that all the information he had gathered was likely false. At that moment, the knight stepped forward to finish him off, declaring that the spy would redeem himself and apologize to everyone with his death. A few days earlier, under a starry night, Lakis had asked Jared what would happen if two territories sent their forces to attack Cribia together. Jared responded, somewhat unsure, that they would probably use the main road. Lakis explained that there were two plausible options for invaders. The area around the main road was easy to ambush, while the lower terrain had a higher concentration of soldiers. Jared agreed, saying that was true, as anyone could see that they had a geographical advantage, which is why Batman and Horgos likely thought the same. That was why Horgos had sent his spy to carefully inspect and discover a hidden path to attack Cribia. Jared tells Lakis that if the spy is truly skilled, he has likely discovered the hidden path. The Lord then reveals that this is why he planned to set traps along that path, and the boy pulls out a mysterious object. Curious, the knight examines the device and says he's never seen such a trap before, asking if he could take a look at what it does. Jared steps in front of him and asks him to stay behind for safety. After positioning the trap and connecting it to a mana thread, Jared prepares to activate it. With a quick pull of the cord in the blink of an eye, a massive explosion occurs, sending numerous projectiles flying through the air. The bullets from the trap even pierced through trees, and Jared shielded himself with a mana barrier. Amazed, the chief of the guard comments that it was unbelievable, and realizing how powerful the bomb was, he remarks that this weapon was extraordinary. Jared states that by using it, he will wipe out all the enemies at once, and thus the lands will not become a battlefield. In other words, that hidden path will become Horgo's passage to hell, and at that moment, the man was marching with his army exactly where Jared wanted him to. Horgos, excited and unaware of what was about to happen, continued marching toward Cribia. The general called for his soldiers to listen. He ordered his subordinates to cut the limbs off those who resisted. As for those who surrendered, they were to be bound in chains and imprisoned. The bad man also declared that at the start of this war, an eternal era of wealth and honor would descend upon Mallorca. Therefore, he told everyone to raise their weapons and begin. However, someone interrupted Horgos, remarking that this was indeed the beginning. The captain recognized the voice and tried to locate where it was coming from. Hidden in the bushes, Jared taunted Horgos, telling him he was wrong about one thing. What they needed to raise wasn't their weapons, but their shields. Jared continued, saying that the general should taste a bit of his own medicine, as our protagonist had prepared something with great care. At that moment, the various traps Jared had laid were interconnected by magical threads, and the boy was ready to pull them. Akrun felt the mana flowing beneath him, powerful enough to make the ground tremble. The mage tried to command his vassals to activate their defensive spells, but it was too late. A massive explosion ripped through the entire hidden path. Many soldiers were hit, their bodies engulfed in heat, sending them into eternal sleep. Akrun barely managed to defend himself and protect his leader. Seeing the explosion and the smoke billowing through the forest, Batman was stunned. He thought a massive blast had occurred along the hidden path where Horgos had been. Batman realized there was a possibility they were at a disadvantage in this war, and that Jared had prepared a trap. However, the man reassured his soldiers that even without Mallorca's support, they still had over 1,800 men. He ordered his vassals to continue the assault on Cribia, and they obeyed. At this point, Lacus was in command of Cribia's forces, giving orders to his soldiers. A clash between the two armies ensued, and the battle began. Back at the hidden path, Horgos, nursing a wound on his arm, groaned in pain. Akrun, seeing this, asked if the man was alright, to which Horgos replied that he was fine and asked for a report on the mission. Akrun informed him that aside from the 500 soldiers trailing behind them in the rear, everyone else had been annihilated. Horgos asked about the two third-class mages, and Akrun replied that Isaac and Odium had also perished. The leader of Mallorca realized how dire the situation was, with all the soldiers he had led against Jared now dead. Lost in thought, he muttered that he never would have imagined the leader of Cribia wielded such a powerful weapon. He began formulating a plan with his remaining ally, but at that moment he was interrupted by Jared, who leaped out and charged at his mage. The king of Mallorca panicked as he watched Jared attack his only remaining soldier, Akrun. Our protagonist leaped incredibly high, taking his enemy into the sky with him. Holding Akrun by the neck, Jared questioned why the mage was so desperate. Akrun retorted, calling the boy a scoundrel and asking if he had been pretending to be innocent all along. Jared smiled, saying that Akrun had realized the truth far too late as they continued to ascend. Akrun asked how high Jared planned to go, but the boy calmly replied that this height should be sufficient. Without warning, he released Akrun. As the mage plummeted toward the ground, he began to panic, his body spinning uncontrollably. High above, Jared watched his enemies descend and then flew down after him. While heading toward his opponent, Jared activated a magic circle and announced that he was giving Akrun two choices. He could either use a flight spell to stop his fall or summon a shield to protect himself from the incoming ice storm. Jared then cast the spell, urging Akrun to make his decision quickly. Akrun, growing frantic, cursed Jared and declared that the boy was insane. The narrator explained that typically, in a magical duel, the two opponents would distance themselves and exchange a series of attacks as if testing each other's strength. After gauging one another's abilities, they would begin launching powerful strikes, and this was the usual pattern. However, Jared had completely shattered the traditional approach to magical duels. Back in the battle, Jared shattered his opponent's shield and caught him in midair. Akrun, still confused by Jared's actions, wondered if the boy was trying to commit suicide along with him. But then, Akrun noticed something below, a magic circle on the ground. He began to laugh, saying that he now understood what Jared was planning. After analyzing the different classes of mages, Akrun remarked that a fourth-class mage was by no means weak. Even Horgos, who ruled Mallorca, a place full of criminals, through sheer force, had paid large sums of money to employ third-class mages to handle situations carefully. However, there were two reasons why Jared had screamed in frustration when he first reincarnated in that world. In the past, he had been strong enough to defeat the reincarnated Lich Deluk multiple times. Compared to that, Jared's current form seemed inadequate. He was someone who could only use 4th class magic once. Regarding Akrun, his skills were well balanced and perfectly distributed, making him an ideal 4th class mage. Though his close combat abilities were lacking in terms of magic, he was evenly matched with Jared. As the explanation concluded, Akrun cast a fortification spell and taunted the Lord of Kribia, asking if he truly believed he could win. Mid-air, the mage attacked our protagonist, who barely managed to defend himself with a mana shield. Akrun explained that in close combat, shields are easily broken, which was why Jared was maintaining a certain distance from him. With that, Akrun struck Jared's shield, breaking through and landing a hit. Jared's helmet shattered from the impact, and the boy let out a small groan of pain. Akrun continued, saying that he had seen through Jared's magic. The spell below was a teleportation spell, a dimensional portal. Akrun explained that since Jared couldn't use flight magic to counter any of his strong attacks, the blonde had planned to use the portal to save himself after letting his enemy fall. The mage admitted that while he had initially thought Jared only knew a single 4th class magic pattern, the boy had shown that he could change his strategy, which was impressive. However, Akrun boasted that he had seen through Jared's tricks. As a result of the earlier attack, Akrun was the one falling into the dimensional portal first. Jared tried to stop Akrun from entering the portal, but the mage prepared a fire spell taunting Jared by asking what choice he would make. Akrun questioned whether Jared would block his attack or stop his own fall. Then he launched the fireball at the blonde. Laughing maniacally, Akrun declared that if Jared were hit by his flames, it would be the end for him. No matter what Jared chooses, Akrun believed that the boy would die either way. Jared, however, quickly used his magic to defend himself, pushing through the fireball. But by this time, the 4th class mage was already crossing through the portal. Akrun celebrated his success, confident that even if Jared survived the attack, he wouldn't be able to use the portal. As Akrun fully passed through the magic portal, he declared that once Jared entered the portal after him, he would be met with lethal attacks. However, the poor subordinate of Malurka hadn't realized that the portal was a trap. The moment he crossed it, sharp spikes embedded themselves in his body. In his final moments, Akrun, confused and bleeding out, questioned what happened. Jared gracefully landed on the ground and began mocking his opponent. With a smug expression, Jared commented that Akrun seemed utterly confused about the situation. It was obvious, Jared pointed out. Without his magic, Akrun was just a reckless fool. Jared continued, explaining that thanks to Akrun's attack, he had actually softened Jared's fall. On the other hand, when Jared cast the Ice Storm earlier, it sped up Akrun's fall, causing him to plummet faster. Jared revealed that he had purposely let himself be hit to ensure Akrun fell into the dimensional portal, where Jared had already set up his trap. In the end, Jared remarked, all of Akrun's mocking words about Kribia were for nothing, and now he was on the brink of death. Jared also pointed out that Horgo's subordinate had been in his grasp from the very beginning. Irritated, Jared declared that Akrun had committed numerous crimes and would now receive the justice he deserved. The blonde boy unleashed a massive fire spell and hurled it at his enemy, incinerating Akrun completely. As Akrun's body turned to ash, Jared received several rewards for completing his mission. He thought to himself that Akrun never stood a chance, given that the mage hadn't even managed to tear his clothes. Elsewhere, the bloody war between the armies of Kribia and Ranella raged on. Amid the chaos, a little farther back, Hayes was diligently using her healing magic to help the wounded soldiers. As the battle progressed, Batman noticed that Kribia's defenses were starting to crumble. Lakiz continued cutting down enemy soldiers, urging his men to hold the line. However, one of his comrades reported that they needed reinforcements at the center, as the soldiers' formation had broken. With that breach, Ranella's soldiers began piercing through Kribia's defenses. Batman then ordered his soldiers to ignore the common soldiers and target the civilians in the lower areas. One of Batman's subordinates, with a greedy grin, thought to himself that he would be filthy rich by the time this war was over. Hayes and the others assisting the wounded noticed the approaching enemies and were struck with fear. Without hesitation, one of Batman's soldiers charged at the defenseless civilians, but just before he could strike, a metal ball brutally smashed into his face. Batman's comrades were in shock as they realized what was standing before them. An ex-veteran soldier of Kribia stepped forward, remarking that despite Lakiz's earlier comments about Kribia's weakening power, they couldn't have expected to be pushed back so easily. A woman wielding a massive iron mace added that since they had left, Kribia's army had grown weak. Another man, wearing a wolfskin cloak, speculated that this weakness was why Jared had sought them out even after their retirement. Lakiz, seeing his old comrades, asked why they had taken so long. The man responded that they had dealt with the remaining Mallorca warriors before arriving. Several soldiers, accompanied by Kribia's veterans, took their positions for battle. The old veteran began a rousing speech declaring that they were there in the name of Barrett, Kribia's great leader, and Jared, Barrett's successor and the current lord. He ended by proclaiming that the 100 elite soldiers of Barrett's army and the 900 soldiers of Jared's would now fight together as allies in this war. In a flashback, we see younger Jared speaking to Orson, telling him that he had done well up until then. The chubby boy said that Orson had served Cribia for a long time, but it was now time for his retirement. Orson tried to protest, stating that he had been part of the royal guard of the territory, serving under Barrett, but Jared coldly replied that his father was dead. Jared also said that just like Tal, the soldiers who had served his father were no longer needed. The narrator explained that Jared had suddenly dismissed most of the soldiers, and the reason was Cribia's lack of funds. More specifically, it was because the young lord was spending money on his personal desires to live a luxurious life. Quietly, corrupt individuals had taken advantage of the situation and seized control of Cribia. All the guards who had been associated with Barrett were forced out of their positions, and soldiers who had received high wages faced continuous pay cuts. Orson and the veterans like him could not stand by and watch the nation they had worked so hard to build slowly collapse. Instead, they pledged to live out their days in silence, retreating to the forest to disappear quietly. On a snowy day, Orson, dressed in his coat, was out hunting. The man noticed that the snow was particularly heavy that day, and at this rate, he might have to give up on his hunt. In the distance, he saw a tribe of goblins approaching, carrying iron minerals. Orson prepared for battle, wondering how those monsters had made it so deep into the forest. The goblins, noticing the misunderstanding, tried to show that they meant no harm. The creatures simply ignored the veteran and continued on their way. Watching them leave, Orson couldn't understand why the goblins had disregarded him. Later, he went to a blacksmith and questioned him about the situation. The dwarf explained that the goblins were likely delivering the iron they had ordered, as they had been selling tons of weapons to the military recently. Excited, the blacksmith added that thanks to orders from the Lord, they had been working 24 hours a day, and Orson remarked that it sounded exhausting. The dwarf agreed, but said that thanks to this, all the blacksmiths were now living as they had always dreamed. Thanks to Jared, the blacksmith had been reignited with a passion for his craft. He then asked Orson to keep it a secret, as the weapons they were crafting were being delivered in secrecy. Orson reflected that at first he thought the changes happening in Cribia were just luck. However, more and more changes occurred in the territory, leading to its development and the resolution of various problems. As a result, soldiers who had once abandoned Cribia recognized these changes and returned to the army, giving Jared a second chance for everything he had done. These men supported Jared and helped overcome the enemy invasion because they were the best of the best. The armies of Mallorca and Ranella simply didn't stand a chance against Cribia, as the veterans had the experience and skill to prevail. After the bloody battle that resulted in Ranella's defeat, Orson commented that those men were useless. At that moment, several warriors had completely surrendered, and the remaining ones decided to retreat, knowing they couldn't defeat that army. As he fled on horseback, Batman thought to himself that Horgos was an idiot, unable to foresee that the enemies would be hiding. Desperate, he regretted forming an alliance with his greatest enemy and decided to withdraw before Jared arrived. Back at the hidden path, Horgos was leading the remainder of his soldiers. They noticed an enemy approaching from above and realized it was a mage. Immediately, the leader of Mallorca recognized the opponent. It was Jared. Before Horgos could react, Jared appeared beside him and asked with a sly smile if Horgos was doing well. Panicking, the Lord of Mallorca tried to strike at Jared, but the boy appeared above his head. Jared mocked Horgos, saying that he was very weak, perhaps only slightly stronger than Lack. Offended, the bald man demanded that Jared come down and fight like a man. The blonde boy agreed and then conjured a fire spell right above Horgos' head. He launched the attack directly at the leader of Mallorca, striking him squarely and setting him ablaze. The soldiers rushed to protect their leader, but were immediately countered with fiery attacks. After defeating several soldiers who tried to stop him, Jared forced the remaining army to retreat. Horgos, trying to recover, was severely weakened and covered in burns. As Jared descended slowly, he remarked that he had known from the beginning that peace was impossible, as Horgos had been silently planning this war all along. The boy quickly charged at the bald man, striking him in the face and shattering his helmet. Jared continued to pummel the weak lord and then declared that Horgos had planned to take everything from Cribia. For that reason, Jared decided to end it then and there, ensuring that his subordinates would no longer suffer at the hands of Mallorca. Jared, standing over the defeated Horgos, declared that he would cleanse his territory completely. He unleashed a series of magical attacks against his enemy. The battered and broken Horgos scoffed, asking Jared if he really thought this would change anything. In response, Jared calmly stated that he knew he would make mistakes, but there was one thing he was sure of. Looking down at his kneeling enemy, Jared declared that even the old version of himself was better than Horgos. Enraged, the bald man tried to retaliate, but Jared swiftly pierced Horgos' leg with a knife, mocking him, saying he would relieve the stress for him. Despite his injuries, Horgos held on to his pride and questioned whether Jared truly thought his death would solve everything. The defeated lord warned that once the Imperial Knight General found out, he would bring his knights to seek vengeance. Suddenly, Jared pulled out his Paradiso diary and asked Horgos if he knew what it was. Flipping through the pages, Jared calmly informed Horgos that if he was talking about Byrox, he wouldn't be coming to avenge him. Shocked, Horgos demanded to know how Jared knew that name. Jared explained that the diary contained countless nights of meticulous writing, detailing people and events in this world, just a collection of personal notes. With a smile, Jared revealed that he had remembered Horgos and Byrox were related. He laughed eerily, asking if Horgoz really thought that Berox, the Imperial Knight General of Etima, would travel over 5,000 kilometers, crossing 4 kingdoms and dozens of territories for a feudal cause like this. Jared emphasized that while Berox might not take Horgoz's death lightly for someone as power-hungry as him, Horgoz was a disgrace rather than a valuable family member. In fact, Jared continued, no one would mourn the death of the leader of Malurka. Instead, they'd likely be relieved that the troublemaker was gone. With a gentle smile, Jared told Horgoz that his life had been utterly worthless. Finally, Jared remarked that he had prepared far more than Horgoz could have imagined, so he needn't worry. As he said this, a magic circle began to form beneath Horgoz. With a small gesture of mercy, Jared asked if Horgoz had any final words. Infuriated by this final insult and with his pride shattered, Horgoz pulled the knife from his leg and lunged at Jared, cursing him. In an instant, a wave of blue magic surged toward the leader of Malurka. In the blink of an eye, Horgoz was frozen solid, like a statue. To finish the war, Jared remarked that Horgoz was in a bad mood and said he'd hear the rest of his final words in another life. The frozen Horgoz began to crumble into dust and was carried away by the wind. With the battle complete, Jared gained several status points. Relieved that it was all over, he collapsed to the ground. Looking at the remaining soldiers of Malurka, they locked eyes with Jared. Realizing there was no point in resisting, they all immediately surrendered, raising their hands in defeat. The narrator explained that the remaining soldiers of Malurka stripped off their armor and surrendered, making it an easy victory. Jared didn't celebrate the win, but instead advanced with a new strategy, disguising himself as a citizen of Malurka. From the beginning, Shin had only one goal, to bring Malurka and Ronella under his control. In the end, Malurka fell to the Caribbean Empire. In just one day, the ruler of that territory had changed hands. Afterward, Jared reflected on how Caribbean had become self-sufficient, even though it was still weak. Suddenly, Lacus appeared, asking what their next move would be. Lacus pointed out that, like Caribbean, Ronella lacked a stronghold, and with its military force destroyed, it was highly unlikely it would be able to defend themselves now. Jared agreed, noting that in warfare, the side with the superior numbers usually won. Confidently, Jared told his soldiers that they would now march on Ronella. However, Jared's ambitious plan was disrupted by the arrival of an unexpected individual. We now see Jared sitting in a meeting room with Batman. A man named Caper was explaining that, as the leader responsible for the war, Lord Horgoz had died. With that, the cause of the conflict had been eliminated and good results had been produced. Jared disagreed, saying that he didn't believe the responsibility lay with just one person. At that moment, Batman, visibly nervous, called out Caper's name, fearing what could happen to his own territory. The red-haired Caper then stated that if this was the case, Lord Batman should agree to pay a compensation fee, adding that, as a pacifist, he didn't want to see his neighbors involved in another war. Observing the unfamiliar figure, Jared quickly realized that Caper was likely plotting to take advantage of Ronella's vulnerability. He suspected the man was putting on a performance, pretending to be a pacifist while waiting for the chance to stab Batman in the back. Suddenly, Jared's imagination spiraled, and he envisioned himself losing his temper, rejecting Batman's words, and preparing an ice spell. He unleashed a massive ice storm on Caper, followed by several more powerful attacks. After launching a barrage of magic, he conjured a fireball and hurled it at his enemy, engulfing the area in a cloud of smoke. As the smoke began to clear, Caper emerged completely unharmed, drawing his sword. With a swift and precise movement, Caper sliced Jared in half before he had a chance to retaliate. But it was all in Jared's mind, a fleeting fantasy of how things could go terribly wrong. Realizing this, Jared calmed himself, recognizing that Caper was a B-rank tank, not someone he could afford to fight recklessly. Caper, the leader of a central territory twice the size of Caribbean, was someone Jared would have to deal with carefully. As Jared considered this, Caper politely asked if he agreed with peace. Knowing it would be futile to start a fight with Caper now, Jared nodded in agreement, much to Caper's delight, who commended Jared for having a good heart. Jared, however, had other plans. He thought to himself that eventually he would find a way to eliminate Caper, but now was not the time. That night at the mansion Ella had been given, Lena was resting in her bed. Outside, Ella, with her red hair flowing, was sipping wine, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. As she drank, Ella sensed someone approaching and asked why they were still awake at such a late hour. Chloe, seeking fresh air, joined her master and sat beside her. Ella noticed that Chloe seemed distracted throughout the day and asked if the war was weighing on her mind. Chloe denied it, explaining that she was merely wondering why Lord Jared hadn't asked for Ella's help during such a crucial time. Ella shrugged, explaining that Jared probably didn't want to ask a guest to protect his home. After all, he had invited her to teach Lena not to fight in his war. Chloe retorted, stating that Caribbean was on the brink of being overtaken by enemies, which should have been reason enough for Jared to ask for Ella's assistance. Ella took another sip of wine and mused that, judging by the results, it seemed like Jared had been preparing for this war for quite some time. Chloe agreed, saying she felt the same when she first met him, that Jared was always thinking ahead. She revealed that she had several chances to speak with him during their downtime, and Jared would always ask if she was well. He even knew that most Grey Elves preferred to stay within the safety of their own territory, and asked her why she was traveling the world. In truth, Jared was aware of the cruel fate Chloe's father had met at the hands of the Black Orcs. Ella, surprised by this, noted that the Grey Elves were the only ones who knew that information, and she only knew because Chloe had confided in her. Chloe continued, explaining that Jared had also advised her not to seek vengeance on the Black Orcs, but to look ahead to something far greater in the distant future. Ella, smiling, remarked that such words were typical of Jared and wondered aloud how the boy knew so much. Chloe confessed that she too was curious to understand how Jared knew all these things. Ella then stood up, suggesting that Chloe should keep an eye on Jared as they still had plenty of time left in Cribia. Before leaving, Ella playfully added that Chloe should let her know if she started feeling anything else as well. Chloe, realizing what Ella was about to do, saw her master grabbing a bottle of wine, clearly intending to offer it to Jared. Embarrassed, Chloe thought to herself that this was exactly why there were so many rumors about her master. Meanwhile, in a dark alley in Mallorca that same night, a man threw a glass bottle against the wall, cursing Horgos for being an idiot. The man with white and black hair was furious that the former lord of Mallorca had not only led so many soldiers to their deaths, but had also lost the war and died himself. As he packed up the chemical compounds he was trafficking, the man grumbled about the money he had lost because of that fool. After securing the goods, he ordered his vassals to take all the money and anything valuable before following him out of Mallorca. During his departure from the hideout, the young man also thinks that his trade routes are safe, so they just needed to prepare for the future once they got out of there. However, one of his subordinates warns him that he should look to the left, and the man sighs while saying that person was fast. Upon looking to the side, the young man sees that Jared was accompanied by his army, and the blonde youth says hello to Prua. With a menacing expression, he asks where Prua was going in such a hurry, and the young man says he was moving because of his new job. He begins to activate an amulet shaped like a clock, and then says he didn't have time for our protagonist. The boy quickly retorts that he was also busy capturing him and his subordinates, and then he launches several magic missiles at his opponent. For some reason, Prua remains calm, simply watching the magic coming toward him. The young man thinks it's a nuisance and immediately activates his magic artifact. With that, the spatial distortion clock makes all of Jared's spells stop instantly. Lakaz asks if Prua was also a mage, but Jared responds that he is not. The blonde explains that it's an effect of his artifact, which can delay spells within a 20-meter radius of Prua. Our protagonist thinks that the artifact can affect Tier 5 magic, but he is still a Tier 4. Therefore, whether he likes it or not to make an effective attack, he would have to be at least 20 meters away from his enemy. Immediately after, the boy enters the artifact's barrier. Prua is surprised by the attitude of the Lord of Cribia and questions if a mage was willing to fight him so close. Jared ignores his opponent and says that since Prua was the ruler of the infamous Detrahair drug cartel, the man would meet his end that night. Seeing that he might be eliminated, the man assumes his enemy must be tired since he was there right after the war had ended. Then trying to bargain, he asks the blonde to forget about it and suggests they make a deal. Smiling, the young man states that he will pay double the amount he gave Horgos and perhaps even 3 times more, and suggests that Jared turn a blind eye to him. Prua also says that he didn't want to start a war with the new lord of the territory his organization occupied. Lakaz gets irritated by that attitude, and Jared thinks that if he lets Prua go this time, the northern region of the Nas continent will fall under Detrahair's influence. In the future, Lena would be known as the Living Fortress, and Prua would be known as the Right Hand of the Tyrant, the Demon King's advisor. Finally, the blonde declares that it's all right and that they would have to eliminate people like Prua and maintain Mallorca's dignity as a new territory. Feeling offended, the young man draws his sword and says it would be impossible to negotiate. Then he asks if defeating a Kroon had gone to our protagonist's head. Jared immediately lowers his sleeve and reveals a golden artifact on his wrist. The young man thinks that according to the 5th option of that artifact, if his level is lower than his opponent's, his strength and intelligence will be doubled. Prua simply watches a purple aura emanating from Jared and is frightened by it. Then, being overcome by darkness, the Lord asks if his opponent was ready to take a nap. A battle begins in the middle of the city of Mallorca between the warriors of Cribia and the criminals. Our protagonist is in a frantic fight against his opponent Prua. The man begins to envelop his sword with an ability called Recklessness and immediately slices through all of Jared's spells. Then the young man leaps toward the Flying Lord. One of Cribia's warriors stands in front of Prua and says he won't let the young man harm his lord, but the blonde asks his soldier to stand back. The young man with black and white hair with a simple strike manages to split the warrior's shield in half, who is terrified by this. Immediately after, he jumps on the soldier's head and leaps toward Jared. The boy simply watches his enemy coming toward him and immediately uses his light magic. With that bright flash, Prua is momentarily blinded. When he regains his sight, the young man only sees several magic missiles coming his way. The subordinates become worried about their master, seeing that the young man was hit. However, the man manages to return to the ground safely, only slightly hurt, while noting that Jared was very strong. The young man also thinks that even though he's a mage, Jared was also skilled in close combat, and on top of that, had cast a magic missile far too quickly. Finally, Prue questions whether the blonde was really tier 4, as fighting the Lord felt like battling 4 crewmen at the same time. Clapping his hands, our protagonist expresses his admiration for his enemy's skill in managing to cut his shield in half. He also emphasizes that the way the drug dealer wields his sword is truly incredible. However, Jared comments that he couldn't stop thinking that Prue was relying on an artifact, since the sword he possesses is a sword designed as an anti-magic tool. The Lord then begins to descend to the ground and says that without that weapon, Prue would be extremely weaker. Prue becomes completely infuriated and says that the former Lord Horgos was the same, and like him, the boy seemed to have a very loose tongue. The blonde doesn't let himself be affected and says he was just telling the truth, and that the spatial distortion clock also seemed like nothing but a toy. Unable to listen any longer, Jared's enemy evolves his ability to stage 2 and becomes significantly stronger. Furious, he charges toward the Lord, who starts to fly backward, distancing himself. The young man uses his flight magic to flee from his enemy and immediately activates his fire attack. After sending a fireball, Prue manages to cut through the magic with just one strike and continues pursuing Jared. The boy turns into an alley to try to shake off his opponent, but the swordsman is too fast and catches up. He then uses his magic to break 2 walls surrounding him, and the debris begins to fall toward Prue. However, the young man in rage uses those concrete shards to jump on them and advance further toward Jared. Prue charges at his enemy, ready to slice him. At that moment, the boy turns around and notices his opponent approaching. When Prue attempts to strike Jared, he only cuts part of his opponent's coat. Seeing that his enemy dodged the attack at the last moment, the bandit asks if it was teleportation. Jared continues mocking him, saying he was scared since with just one blow, he could have been sliced in 2. But now it was his turn, and the young man begins to summon dark magic into his hands. Then he uses his lightning magic along with his dark power, sending it toward the criminal. After being struck, the young man writhes in pain on the ground. Jared asks his opponent to give up, since if he were a swordsman, Prue would be a tricky opponent to deal with, given that the man was faster than any other ordinary swordsman, and each of his sword strikes was absurdly strong. However, unlike a normal swordsman, Jared had no intention of stepping into his opponent's attack range. As he gets up, the white-haired man says Jared's analysis was frightening, and that it could even be applauded. Suddenly, he uses his recklessness ability again, advancing to stage 3 and becoming extremely muscular. Smiling like a maniac, he says that since Jared is such a clever boy, he should figure out who's going to win this fight. However, with confidence, the young man declares he is already 100% certain that the victory is his. Unable to bear the insults any longer, Prue uses his recklessness once more, advancing to the 4th stage, thinking he will finish Jared off with just one strike. With his muscular legs, he charges at his opponent, causing even the ground to crack. Jared, seeing such speed, becomes extremely worried and scared. Then with his blade, the Lord of Cribia's enemy attacks and pierces someone. However, it is revealed that the one who had been pierced by the sword was Prue. Jared, who had seemed frightened, changes his expression and says he didn't think the man would be fooled so easily. The chapter begins with the narrator explaining that despite Deluk and Prue being strong enemies, the two are completely different. Deluk, weakened over time, was partially sealed by magic and had a frail body. Prue, on the other hand, was in the midst of his evolution, with access to all his abilities, territorial advantages, and artifacts. Even though Jared could easily dodge Deluk's attack patterns and slowly drain his life by wisely using his magic, either of them could kill him with a single blow if he let his guard down for just 1 second. However, that type of strategy wasn't Prue or Caper's style. Faced with this dilemma, Jared bet on Prue's special ability, Recklessness. This ability works as if you were stepping on an accelerator. Thus, the user can increase their physical capacity in stages, and it's very effective against the Lord. However, Jared provoked Prue to make him advance through the stages of Recklessness. Being a proud man with a notorious criminal reputation, Prue couldn't endure so many insults. Then, after his mind was overtaken by recklessness, Jared used spatial magic to pierce Prue with his own sword. Prue made a mistake he normally wouldn't have and cost him his life. Jared explains to his enemy that to win that battle, he should have kept a cool head and a warm heart, as people say. Next, the young man takes a powder in his hand and explains that countless people die because of the drugs Prue sold. People who went into debt because of it, and this would be revenge for them. Thus, our protagonist puts the drug into his opponent's mouth. The Lord also says that since the criminal always proudly sold it, he should feel firsthand the sensation of using that drug. And upon ingesting it, the criminal begins to writhe and convulse. Finally, the young man says he will be decapitated since threatening the nation's future and its citizens is an unforgivable crime. At that moment, Jared's soldiers had already subdued the criminals of Mallorca. Seeing his lord arrive after the victory, Lacus explains that they were already suppressing the remaining rebels. The Lord of Cribia then states that even though Prue turned Mallorca into the largest drug cartel hub, some criminal nations were still operating there. And with an extremely menacing expression, he declares that before sunrise, they would wipe them all out. He orders his soldiers that if any criminals resist, they are not to be allowed to live. Furthermore, all criminals should be silenced before anything else, as that land will no longer be governed by crime. So they begin the work, and after a long day of cleansing in Mallorca, by the early morning, the sun finally begins to rise. Tired, Laches looks at someone while thinking that his lord always overcame countless difficulties with his mysterious wisdom. But this time, instead of showing everyone that wisdom, he showed his sharp, decisive, and swift nature. And the image his lord conveyed was that of an emperor on the rise. With a gleam in his eyes watching the lord, the young man feels proud, and thus Laches experiences his first awakening. After all these events, a massive pile of paperwork left behind by Horgos can be seen. Covered with all those papers, Jared thinks that the place was a mess and that he didn't have time to deal with all that paperwork. Looking at it, the boy mentions that there were two things he needed to do. One was to enter the ancestral tombs around Mallorca to gain more power, and the other was to find a skilled expert who could mine Caldia. Jared explains that Caldia is a particularly difficult ore to extract, discovered 13 years ago in Paradiso, and is stronger than iron. He asserts that if Cribia manages to get their hands on it first, it will reach the top of military power. However, the boy realizes he is swamped with work and gets annoyed at Horgos for leaving all that behind. An idea comes to mind, and the young man remembers that when he arrived in Cribia, Hayes helped him with everything he needed. So looking at those papers, the boy comments that he wants to see the young woman again. In search of assistance, Jared's talent scout springs into action, and that day they would search for talented individuals who could help manage Mallorca. The first candidate for this was Tomanio, a man skilled in assisting with political tasks, and with him, there was no doubt that Mallorca would slowly be reformed. Immediately, Jared agrees and selects that person. However, Tonio had been executed for being a counselor to Horgos, and there was no way to hire him anymore. The second option was Katie, a girl with a sixth sense for business. Jared knows he doesn't have many options, so he promptly chooses to hire her. However, he can't, as after requesting extra income from Horgos, Katie was exiled. The last candidate was Marcolin, who was the type of person who pretends to be kind to others, yet was still quite skilled. Reluctantly, Jared agrees as he would have to work with what he had, but he fails again, as after Horgos' death, Marcolin resigned and fled the same night. Seeing that there was no one useful in that city to help him, the boy falls to the ground in despair, wondering what kind of place that was. The young man states that there wasn't a single talented person in Mallorca, and this was the first time his wisdom and mind had failed him. Depressed, he wonders if he should bring Oren or Avila there, but immediately dismisses the idea, knowing they are busy with Cribia. The system notifies Jared of several complaints, as many problems were spreading throughout the territory because of Horgos. Suddenly, Laches arrives like a savior and calls for his lord. Jared asks what happened, and his guard explains that there is a problem in the village of Divani. Laches explains that a leader was assigned not long ago to take care of the village, but the soldiers receive reports that this leader hasn't been doing his job. The guard also states that the villagers came to him crying, asking for help to restore the village to normal. And not only that, everyone had heard that this leader has been drinking every day and occupying himself by drawing obscene pictures. Jared comments that it seems this person hasn't learned anything despite the state the territory is in. Then, activating his recklessness ability, which he stole from Prua, the young man declares he will have to go there and discipline him personally. After a while, the Lord finally arrives at the humble village of Divani. They head to the place where Divani's leader was, and a furious Jared kicks the door open. The young man bursts in with his subordinates, and Laches calls for the village chief, Julian, ordering him to come out of hiding immediately. Laches continues calling for Julian, and one of Cribia's soldiers notices something on the wall and becomes embarrassed. The young man sees several obscene drawings, and all the soldiers are astonished, while the chief of the guard becomes angry with them. Amidst all those drawings and bottles of alcohol, a young man dressed in white questions who is there. Laches asks this person if he is Julian. Jared uses his mind's eye to analyze this person, thinking that he's seen many talents before, all of them with their unique gifts, and he ensured that all those talents were developed as quickly as possible, even if just a little. However, the young man is impressed, as this guy is nothing like that. Of all the people he has seen so far, he is the closest to perfection. Julian's appearance is revealed, a simple man with long white hair. Julian introduces himself, stating that he is the leader of the village and asks if there is something wrong. The chief of the guard becomes irritated, but Jared asks his soldier to wait and says he will speak. Before saying anything, Jared thinks to himself that Julian, even being so skilled, was hiding it for some reason. So the Lord asks why the young man has never done anything for that village, as he wasn't being paid to slack off. Boldly, the young man explains that it's because everything there is normal. He comments that he doesn't think there is anything that needs taking care of, and that he shouldn't be in such an insignificant village. Laches sees that as an insult and immediately draws his sword, angered by such blasphemy. However, Jared asks the young man to stop and then sits on the floor calling Julian's name. The Lord asks if Julian doesn't think that job is suitable for him, and the young man fully agrees. With a plan in mind, the blonde asks the village leader to tell the truth and accuses Julian of not doing it because he didn't want to, but rather because he didn't have the skill for it. Feeling insulted, the white-haired young man responds that he simply didn't want to, and if he wanted, he could easily do it. Jared then asks if he could prove it, and Julian says that if the Lord wanted, he could supervise him. Seeing this heated exchange between the two, Lacaz becomes extremely confused. Julian then starts his work, calling for his assistant right after. The young man asks his servant to retrieve all the past documents as he would assess all the village's cases and problems. While waiting for the paperwork, Julian asks Jared and his soldiers to help remove the obscene drawings from the wall. Jared agrees, and then he and his subordinates begin cleaning up the place. Julian starts solving the village's problems, even the small ones like a woman who was having trouble with her calf, or some disputes that were occurring between merchants. Even the people producing honey asked Julian for help, and the young man promptly assisted them. The young man, after analyzing some papers, goes to Lacaz and says that it seems someone was siphoning money from the harvest profits. Observing all of this, Jared is impressed, as the village leader did a month's worth of work in just half a day. After finishing everything, Julian states that everyone with resolved problems and the citizens can leave the room. With that, the Lord also asks his soldiers to leave, as he wanted to have a private conversation with Julian. He sits in front of the village chief and says that he now understands why Julian was so confident, because the young man truly has talent. The young white-haired man apologizes for his lack of effort in managing the village up until that day, explaining that since he knew he could do the job with ease, he ended up procrastinating. Jared says it's fine and states that he understood the young man's plan to get the Lord's attention. Julian, realizing he had been found out, is surprised. The village leader then says he has only one question for the Lord and asks what the boy's dream is. In some flashbacks of Julian, we see his father mistreating him, telling him not to think about foolish things like dreams. The boy was always mistreated, and even though he was recognized for his ability, his dreams were crushed because he was a commoner. Even Horgos said he brought the boy there because he aced the command test of his empire, and the bald man too destroyed Julian's dreams. In Julian's opinion, a leader's ambitions must be greater than the combined ambitions of all his people. And even though he serves such a people, just like his lord, he felt insignificant and small. Jared then looks at the village leader and finally declares that his dream is to become the hero of the Nas continent. The young man explains that rather than being just any lord of a small territory, he wanted to be the hero of the entire world. Julian, hearing this, becomes extremely excited and asks if the boy was lying. The Lord explains that he wasn't, as he didn't seem like someone who would lie about something like that. Realizing that the person he had been searching for had appeared right in front of him, the white-haired boy is extremely happy. He tells Jared that, for a long time, he had been searching for someone he could admire. The man also comments that if there is a lord who underestimates his vassal, then the fault lies not with the vassal, but with the lord. Then, while serving a drink, Julian requests that by the end of that year, Jared either become a count or lead a group of territories to prove his dream. The blonde responds that he will show the young man who he truly is. Jared, with a gentle smile, then asks if Julian would like to rule by his side. Laughing, the young man replies that there is no way he could oppose a lord who has completely earned his respect. However, he will leave without hesitation if Jared fails. While toasting, the Lord of Cribia declares that they will be together for eternity, and that he will make Julian the chief executive to manage all the internal affairs of Malurka. In Cribia, while cleaning the mansion, Hayes wonders when the Lord will return home. The young woman notices Avila and the war veteran Ornos talking. The two are discussing the new vassal who will take on the role of chief executive over the entire territory. Orwin is also present and notices Hayes' expression. The elder then asks if the young woman will also greet the Lord upon his arrival. Realizing that Jared was finally returning home, the young woman becomes extremely happy and answers affirmatively. In Malurka, after Julian was appointed as chief executive, the territory quickly stabilized. Jared worked even harder, seeing his subordinates' dedication, and in the last week, he practically lived in the office. Hayes knocks on the door where our protagonist was, and upon entering, she offers the young man some tea made from the Carlicus flower. She mentions that she heard it's good for weight loss, so she bought a little, but Jared thinks that his diet had already ended. Nevertheless, he accepts. The woman continues to pamper the boy, while Julian simply observes. The white-haired young man asks his lord to take a rest, but the boy responds that he's fine. Julian insists once again for his lord to rest, and reluctantly, Jared considers it. The white-haired man then states that he's going to meet with the other vassals and will return shortly, and Jared simply acknowledges this. In his mind, Jared reflects that his Cribia vassals, upon hearing the rumors, came to see with their own eyes if Julian was truly up to the task. However, they recognized the young man's skills and began praising him immensely, impressed by his dedication. Our protagonist, accepting the offer of tea, asks that since there's an extra cup, Hayes should drink it with him. However, still thinking of herself as a simple maid, she becomes embarrassed, saying she couldn't do that in front of her lord. The lord mentions that he has said this many times before and repeats once again that when they are alone, she doesn't need to worry about such formalities. Hayes accepts, saying she will do so with all due respect. They soon serve themselves the tea and begin drinking, while the maid just watches her lord. The blonde suddenly asks if the girl is going to quit being a maid, and at that moment, she spits out all the tea in her mouth. Trembling, the young woman asks what he meant by that. Almost crying, Hayes asks if she wasn't doing a good job as a maid, so the lord tries to explain that wasn't what he meant. The maid comments that when she arrived at the office, everything was clean and wonders if it was because of her lack of skill. The young man tries to reassure her, saying he only did that to learn cleaning magic, as there would be a time when he would need to use it. Then gently, Jared uses magic to clean the woman's clothes that were stained with tea. The young man says that since Hayes is now a healer, she could be promoted to a higher position, so she would stop being a maid. Still with tears, the girl says she didn't want another maid taking care of Jared, and irritated, he lightly taps her on the head, asking her to obey him at least once in her life. Hayes then states that if she had to stop being a maid, she would stop being a healer. At that moment, a necklace begins to glow behind Jared. A strong light spreads throughout the room, and a voice speaking about death and despair starts coming from that mysterious amulet. Looking at it, Hayes and Jared are confused just listening to the words from that strange object that starts to float. After that, suddenly the pendant's glow fades, and the accessory falls onto the table where it was. Hayes asks what that was, and Jared explains that it was an artifact their criminal possessed. Looking at that object, the boy thinks that it is the tears of Mahart Aye, and normally it's just an artifact that increases your base stats by 25 points. But the true purpose of that object is to be a key to an ancient catacomb that lies beneath Malurka. Jared then asks if Hayes wanted to go outside for a bit, since there was a place he always wanted to go to since he arrived in Malurka. Even confused by that attitude, the young woman agrees. In another place, in a small town called Moralace in the kingdom of Lentus, someone named Belton is being called. A mailman was knocking on the young man's door, stating that he had a letter for him. Belton answers the door and receives the letter, and the mailman also mentions that there were some pretty big boxes arriving there. Right after, he bids farewell to the civilian, and the young man thanks him for delivering the letters. Reading that paper, and with a bag of money beside him, the man thinks that person was quite impressive. In the letter, Jared introduces himself and offers greetings to the man, stating that he wanted some tips since the young man was a veteran. The civilian supposes that that's why Jared gave him so many gold coins, as he wants him to accept that as payment and go meet him. While thinking that it was strange, what previously looked like a young man begins to change shape. Then the youth takes on a different appearance, transforming into a man named Belhard, a great elderly tier 9 mage. After his transformation, he states that even Jared's words were strange, as he mentioned that he found a clue to evolve to tier 5. The mage thinks that even geniuses have no idea what to do to advance in tier, and that was really odd. With that name in mind, he begins to question who that person was to speak with such confidence, and after a while, a realization dawns on him. Belhard remembers that Jared is the useless son of Barry, but he doesn't know how a chubby boy like that could be acting that way. Burning the letter with his magic, Belhard states that he will have to go there to confirm. After all, a great mage also needs to have the necessary talent to evolve. Back in Malurka, at this moment, Jared was walking with his companion Hayes through a dense forest. The young woman comments that it was kind of scary there, and the blonde responds that there were no villains in that forest, so they were fine. In his mind, the young man comments that the atmosphere there was spooky, but there didn't seem to be anything wrong. He also states that during the game's development, no one found any clues about where the catacombs would be. When everyone was about to give up, the location of the catacombs was revealed in a photo from one of the developers. It was discovered by a reflection on the monitor, which appeared in a mirror. Thus, our protagonist was standing right where the catacombs were possibly discovered. He asks Hayes what she thought of the place, and the young woman comments that aside from the tree being green, it looked pretty normal. Suddenly, the sand in the forest begins to take a strange form, and something appears before them. Jared, realizing what it was, asks the maid to take 5 steps behind him. A strange figure formed from the grains of sand imposingly asks who dares to enter its catacomb. Jared recognizes the being as Mahart, and somehow the divinity also seems to recognize the blonde. The unknown entity identifies the young man as a cursed one, who does not belong to this world, and is surprised that he appeared right in front of it. Hearing this, our protagonist becomes extremely nervous, thinking he has been discovered. Mahart then asks the boy to leave immediately, because when his curses resonate, the world will witness its end. Jared is deeply confused, wondering if Mahart truly knows who he is. The young man supposes that Mahart might be talking to Shin Taepum, who exists within Jared's body. After calming down, the young man remembers that the dialogue was similar to what was in the game, so Mahart might just be mistaken. The Lord asks why Mahart is saying that, but the figure replies that they should no longer speak and that Jared should not disturb his rest. As he creates some magic missiles, Jared thinks that the way Mahart talks about himself is no different from the game and feels relieved that he wasn't discovered. He then tells the figure that they won't achieve anything by talking at that moment and suggests they meet again in the future. Seeing this attitude, the entity declares that Jared has chosen death with such behavior. The young man launches his magic at Mahart, and as it strikes, a figure begins to disintegrate. As the creature disappears, an opening emerges behind it. Hayes is delighted that they found the entrance, so Jared and she enter the place. After the exploration, back at the Lord's mansion in Malurka, in his office, the maid and her lord are analyzing some maps. The young woman asks if she missed anything, and before he answers, Jared thinks that they have finally drawn all the places they had seen. He then replies to the girl that she undoubtedly drew everything perfectly. The young man also comments that he didn't know the girl had a talent for drawing maps, and she explains that when she was younger, she followed her father everywhere and learned from him. Finally, the Lord remarks that this skill is extremely useful in his eyes, and the girl smiles, excited by the compliment. He also asks her when Mary said she would arrive in Mallorca, and Hayes explains that Mary mentioned she had some work to finish, so she would arrive in about 2 days. With that, Jared asks if Hayes could cook for him that day, and the young woman eagerly agrees. Excited, she runs to the kitchen and asks the young man to wait a moment. A bit shy, the boy thinks that her exaggerated excitement sometimes worried him. He turns his attention back to the catacomb, and our protagonist mentions that he explored about half of the place with Hayes, going through safe areas without enemies to map the dungeon. Shin recalls that Mahart's ancient tomb was known in Paradiso as the Mirror Dungeon. In the game, anyone who wanted to defeat Prua, the Demon King's advisor, needed to gain access to the Mirror Dungeon quest. Prua, a mere drug dealer in the future, would become an extremely powerful magnet, all thanks to the artifacts he stole from the Mirror Dungeon. In the game, the large-scale dungeon was barely found and was finally discovered due to a mistake made by one of the developers. As a result of the tomb's notoriety for being impossible to locate, many guilds gathered to complete the dungeon quest. Thanks to everyone helping each other during the raid, the dungeon would be cleared easily. However, that was what everyone expected until they faced true despair. In fact, without even getting close to the boss Mahart, they were completely annihilated. And after such a shocking defeat, many people banded together and formed a union of guilds to attempt the dungeon once again. This was only to fail once more, realizing how insignificant they were compared to that being. The young man also reflects that the fact a small guild managed to clear the dungeon was extremely surprising at the time. He states that everything he had done up until that day is insignificant compared to Mahart's strength. In other words, one mistake could lead to his death, so he had to prepare with that in mind. A few days later, still in that mansion, we see a silence settling in. Hayes was leaning against the door, spying on her lord, while in her head, she comments that her master has been acting suspiciously recently. The woman mentions that Jared has been cleaning the entire mansion with his cleaning magic, calling it training. He has also been storing artifacts he normally wouldn't use for some unknown reason. And finally, he has been drawing, claiming it was part of his studies. The young woman racks her brain trying to understand why, and realizing she couldn't figure it out, assumes there must be some special reason. Aki appears behind Jared and asks if the young man has recently been learning how to draw. Jared replies affirmatively and asks if he could request the young man to sell a few things. He hands over a stack of obscene drawings and explains that Julian had drawn them, and since the papers were just taking up space, he could get rid of them. Embarrassed, Aki agrees to find a buyer and exits the room. Finally, the blonde asks why Julian had been drawing those, and the young man responds that he simply had some free time during the nights. In his head, our protagonist couldn't believe that the young man had already found free time in his schedule and was surprised by how much energy he had. Lacus informs Jared that a carriage from Cribia has arrived at the mansion, and our protagonist says he will be there shortly. He then calls for Hayes to help him, and a young woman quickly responds. She helps Jared put on his armor, and while doing so, she asks if the place he's going to is the ruins they visited earlier. The young man confirms, and she asks if she would be a burden if she went, to which the Lord replies that the place he's going this time would be better explored with fewer people. Resigned, Hayes replies that she would prefer if he didn't go, as it's a dangerous place, and she would rather accompany him. In his head, the young man agrees, thinking that he too wanted her company, since this world is real and he couldn't revive like in the game. But that's precisely why he needed the reward from the Mirror Dungeon, so this time he was taking the best fighters he knew. As the Lord descends the stairs, a familiar female voice states that the boy is late. In front of him, Isabella, Chloe, and Ella are waiting to head to the dungeon. Upon arriving at the entrance of the catacomb, Isabella asks if this is the place, and Jared confirms. The boy explains that he has already explored the interior of the place, so they just need to follow the map, and the blonde-haired woman comments that they should finish quickly and go home. Suddenly, Chloe grabs her lord's attention, wanting to speak with him. The elf says that in this raid, Isabella is a sorceress and Mistress Ella is a skilled swordswoman, so it made sense for the two of them to be there. However, she doesn't understand why she is also there, as she doesn't see herself as useful for anything. The boy retorts that the girl is of extreme importance to the catacomb and would be very useful. Chloe remains silent for a moment, not understanding what he meant, but she lets it go. After some time walking through the dungeon, Ella expresses her disdain for the Demon Kingdom and the blood of the Dark Church. And even though she didn't think it was the case, Ella asks if Jared was there to gain power through darkness. The young man responds that he wasn't, and his only goal in that place was to acquire an artifact. The redhead is relieved, saying that if that wasn't the case, they might have ended up fighting. Nervous, the young man lets out a small laugh, saying that it's a relief that won't happen. Looking at her, the boy realizes that the woman is quite devoted to light and tends to exaggerate a lot. Suddenly, Isabella points out that the path is becoming clearer, and Jared responds that it means they are almost at the end of the labyrinth. He explains that after the labyrinth, there's only one path left, and they will have to pass through a few chambers until they reach the end of the dungeon. Finally, the raid begins, and the three adventurers arrive in front of a large gate guarded by soldiers. The clay soldiers stand in position, holding their spears ready to defend whatever lies behind the door. Jared then tells Isabella that they will use the strategy they discussed earlier, and the young woman agrees. The girl kneels, and from her hand, a dark shadow begins to spread across the ground. The darkness reaches two of the clay soldiers, agitating them. For some reason, they completely ignore Jared and charge straight toward Isabella. Quick-witted, the Lord takes advantage of the opportunity and strikes all those creatures from behind. As a result, the soldiers, unable to react, start to crumble, and Close steps in, finishing off the remaining ones. From two of those creatures, two purple crystals fall to the ground. Isabella is impressed that the clay soldiers only went after her and wonders why they ignored Jared. While picking up one of the dark stones, the young man admits he isn't entirely sure, but he knows those creatures always go after dark mages first. With the stones in hand, the boy states that since they defeated the Guardians, they should disguise themselves, and then he hands the two magical stones to the girls. They then approach the gigantic gate with an engraved symbol and proceed to open it. To disguise themselves, all four warriors in the group don the heads of the clay soldiers. Once inside, Isabella is startled to see an army of those warriors in the room. Ella is equally astonished, commenting that it's incredible and estimating there are at least 2,000 soldiers present. At that moment, the former demon questions her lord if their disguise will work, and the young man explains that as long as their faces match those of the soldiers, they should be fine. The four begin to walk toward the end of the room, and Isabella remains nervous about the situation. The only one who stays calm is Jared, who silently notes that there are at least 2,500 clay soldiers there. Jared recalls that when the raid of 500 people in Paradiso reached this place, there were 3,000 clay soldiers, resulting in a difficult and protracted battle. The young man believes that since the number of people in his group is small, they don't look suspicious, and there is something even more important. Thanks to the disguise effect Chloe placed on their masks, they could easily pass without fighting. Finally, as they reach their destination, the young man turns to Isabella and states that nothing happened just as he said. Chloe mentions that it's good to know her masks were useful, and that the skill was of great importance. Jared comments that even though the clay monsters had poor vision, if they hadn't camouflaged themselves, they would have been spotted immediately. Behind her mask, Chloe feels extremely excited and happy to have been useful, exclaiming that raids are a lot of fun. However, Isabella isn't as pleased, silently watching as her lord praises another girl. She approaches Jared, touches his shoulder, and declares that she helped too. Sighing, the young man admits he can't avoid it and begins clapping his hands, congratulating her. Chloe and her mistress watch the scene, somewhat confused by the exchange. After some time, they reach another chamber, and the group approaches a giant gorilla-like beast, all of them impressed by the creature's size. Isabella remarks that these monsters look somewhat like undead, yet they are different. Jared explains that it's because they were born from curses, which are not the same as dark magic. Before entering his slumber, the monarch Mahart cursed his subordinates, transforming them into beings that would not age. As it was difficult for everyone to maintain their original appearances, most lost their bodies and became clay figures. Ella, hearing this, deduces that all those soldiers are Mahart's subordinates and remarks that Mahart must have been greatly despised. The young lord comments that some of the clay soldiers managed to retain parts of their original bodies, so they should be cautious. Suddenly, the giant clay gorilla, which had been motionless, turns and seems to notice something. From behind its mask, the beast's eye appears human, and it senses what's happening. Immediately, it charges toward the group, catching them off guard with the sudden battle. The creature slams the ground, creating a gust of wind and sending debris flying in all directions. After the loud crash, it's clear that Jared managed to escape, holding Isabella in his arms as he leaps into the air. Chloe and her mistress also avoid being hit by the gorilla's attack and remain unharmed. Isabella doesn't understand why the monster attacked them, and Jared remarks that it shouldn't have happened. He thinks to himself that the dungeon has changed, likely due to his being transported to this world. The clay monster doesn't relent and quickly charges again, this time aiming to grab both Jared and Isabella. However, our protagonist manages to escape and returns to the ground safely once again. Taking advantage of the gorilla being in the air, Ella urges everyone to move away from the soldier. Right after saying this, the young woman begins to prepare a wind spell around her sword. The redhead quickly launches her attack at the opponent, which is hit squarely by the magic. The monster is thrown back and a massive dust cloud fills the area. However, the soldier beast emerges, revealing that it had taken no damage from the blow. Jared and Ella are shocked by the sight, unable to understand why the monster hadn't sustained even a scratch. Immediately, in a counterattack, the beast leaps toward the warrior, attempting to strike her. Ella, seeming extremely excited, says she wants to see just how tough the soldier is. Jared also steps up beside the woman, ready to fight alongside her. However, unexpectedly, the young man utters a word that causes a rumble throughout the room, making the clay soldier stop in its tracks. The beast, for some reason, withdraws and brings its face closer to Jared. With that, the monster turns and returns to the center of the room, becoming immobile once again. Ella asks what kind of magic that was since the clay soldier backed off with just a phrase. Still nervous, Jared explains that the monster had a password to control it and wasn't an ordinary soldier. He asserts that with the magic the monster possessed, there was a small chance for the soldier to become invincible. The young man also comments that the chance was only 1% per person, making it a 4% chance against the group. Chloe couldn't believe that something could make a creature invincible, but Jared explains that those monsters were created with curses, making their effects terrifying. These curses always generate some effect, like not allowing the soldier to leave a certain area or even reducing its rationality. In some cases, the monsters may not be able to distinguish between enemies and allies, attacking anything they see. Finally, Jared concludes that in such cases, the creator establishes a password, and the password here was Avemahart. At that moment, everyone began to remove their masks. The girl was about to question the young man on how he knew that, but she remembers it was a secret and Jared wasn't going to tell. After a walk through the chambers, they arrive in one filled with numerous white pillars. There, a being with two voices greets them and calls the group intruders. This being is sustained by several grotesque bodies and introduces the place as the sanctuary of Lord Mahart. The creature reveals itself, showing that it had two heads, one represented by the sun and the other by the moon. Upon seeing the creature, Jared asks Ella and Chloe to proceed as planned and draw the priest's attention. The sun side of the monster empowers some of its servants and orders them to hold off the intruders. Meanwhile, the moon side also strengthens its slaves but commands its soldiers to finish off the enemies. For some reason, the monsters seem to ignore Ella and charge toward Isabella. The young woman panics, not understanding why those creatures are after her again, and Jared rushes to attack them. Chloe ignores the situation and charges at the priest, who summons grotesque magic in the form of several bodies united into a raven. The deformed raven tries to attack the elf, but she immediately dodges and counterattacks, wounding the priest. After cutting the monster's body, a hand made of creatures forms and goes after the elf. The priest manages to strike her, and the two heads continue to act in different ways. The moon side starts to berate its own slaves, claiming that they never learn. Seeing this, Ella thinks those who wield the power of darkness are truly unpleasant and grotesque. The redhead tells the priest that the ones it is hitting are its own subordinates, but the creature disagrees. The second side of the monster says that the slaves will never reach the status of subordinates, as they are merely tools to be used by Mahart. Ella agrees while defending herself from some of those creatures, and then states that she believes Mahart sees the priest as a tool as well. The creature remains silent for a moment, and then the moon side responds that they are the most loyal servants of Mahart. The warrior retorts that even if they say that, they don't know the truth, as they have become puppets, neither alive nor dead. The sun begins to believe Ella's words, but the moon urges the other head not to trust her. The moon then extends part of his body to charge at the redhead, declaring that it will not forgive her for her blasphemies. Chloe, who was behind them, flies in to separate the two heads. The elf manages to slice through and cut the moon side, causing the priest to split in two. Ella seizes the opportunity and stabs the monster's back, mocking the moon for letting its guard down. Without hesitation, the woman slices the monster in half. The warrior thinks that the priest shouldn't have been an enemy that could be defeated so easily, and that it was thanks to Jared's plan that they managed to accomplish it. Ella also reflects that it's as if the Lord knew exactly how to get through each chamber of the catacomb. After finishing, Ella asks if Jared had completed it. The boy agrees, and the young woman, looking in his direction, sees that Isabella was turning what remained of the priest into a servant.